Picture a winter night on the Great Plains centuries ago, and the sky is a spill of icy stars so bright it feels like the Milky Way has blown snow across the darkness just for you. The wind combs the grass flat and lifts it again, a long breath that turns your cheeks to stone. Your boots sink into crusted powder. Your breath ghosts and snaps away. You think you know winter, you've seen it on screens and coffee mugs. But here you learn its alphabet: wind, hunger distance, patience. Small reality check: without the skills we're about to borrow, you probably won't survive this. The prairie doesn't care about your favorite puffer jacket. It is quietly judging it. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing our little campfire of clocks and places. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge toward a low ridge where the wind feels less personal. A smear of old moon varnishes the snow. Silhouettes cross the horizon. Bison maybe, or horses, and your mind supplies a mammoth for drama, though the real ice wall lies far to the north. Up there, a shield of blue and white has kept whole forests under glass for lifetimes. Mainstream fact whispering in your ear during the last glacial maximum. Roughly 26 to 19,000 years ago, sea levels fall and a steppe tundra spreads in dry, treeless waves, while the Laurentide ice sheet sprawls over much of what you'll one day call Canada. You carry that cold in your lungs with every breath, as if the ice itself were leaning down to inspect your technique. The ground is not blank, it's a library. Snow that squeaks is dry and friendly. Snow that hisses will collapse and leave you kneeling, reinventing the split squat by accident. You adjust your pace, shoulders rounded so the wind won't paint your lungs with knives. Your hands remember the weight of a torch, even when the flame sleeps tucked in an ember bundle like a red-eyed mouse. You're not alone. A small band moves with you, elders, hunters, a child humming, to keep teeth from chattering each footfall, a vote that says yes, we go on. At the ridge you kneel, gloved knuckles pressed to crust, and listen deeper. Historians still argue whether people reached these plains earlier than the famous Clovis hunters, or whether that trail of fluted points truly marks the first footsteps here. What matters tonight is that somebody taught you this drainage. This creek bend under the white this way. The air smells faintly of willow when the wind turns. You have never seen a printed map, but your bones have folded 1,000 miles into a song you can hum in the dark. A quirky tidbit nudges your elbow. Tucked in a pouch is powdered ochre mixed with fat, good for marking snow for small ceremonies, and don't laugh as emergency lip balm. Another pouch holds a sour, nose-wrinkling treasure for tanning hides, because yes, urine has a day job. These are not the glamorous parts of survival, but they're the glue between heroic moments, the quiet tricks that make the heroic moments possible at all. Somewhere in your bag lies a limestone lamp bowl, its rim blackened by 100 nights of fat and wick, a little star you can carry. You descend the lee side where the snow lies calmer. In a cradle of dead grass, a bundle of warmth waits, an ember core wrapped in fungus and bark. You coax it like a pet, and it blushes back a tiny galaxy opening. Not a full fire, save that for later, but enough to remind your fingers what warmth feels like, and to soften a strip of dried meat from punishment to food. Your stomach rumbles like a mammoth clearing its throat. You roll your eyes at your own body's drama and keep walking. Joke 1: if hunger had a ringtone out here, it would be that noise your stomach just made. Down in the valley, a creek moves like an idea reluctant to form a sentence. You can't see the water, but you hear the under-ice gossip, a liquid rumor sliding east. The sky migrates overhead, stars burning, planets loitering, and you get that unsettling, thrilling sensation that you are very small and also exactly sized for this moment. Your modern brain wants to check a weather app. Alas, the forecast is stuck at no signal for the last 15,000 years. Joke 2: you hold your hand up to the sky like a phone anyway, as if the Big Dipper might offer 5 bars. The cold has rules and you respect them. Do not sweat if you can help it. Do not stop moving unless you mean it. Do not turn your back on wind without knowing where it will put its hands next. You tighten the thong of your hood and let your mind drift to the people waiting where your trail will end. Someone practicing a story about a hare outsmarting a snare, someone nursing a quiet flame, someone sharpening a point that hopes to become supper. Out beyond your thoughts, herds carve pale roots. Wolves pad those lines, reading the punctuation. And the ice to the north shifts by inches and by centuries. Its creaks the slowest music on earth. You pause again and look up. The Big Dipper tilts like a ladle. Orion cinches his belt as if the night has a dress code. Elders taught you the sky not for romance, but because it keeps you found. There's practical magic in that. A handful of stars, a handful of terrain lines, and the taste of last autumn's wind. Those are your instruments. You hum the way home, and the child beside you hums the harmony, which is objectively adorable and also good for morale. Another fact sneaks under the door of your attention. People out here prize heaviness on the hips, more than weight on the shoulders. You chew fat first, not because it's fancy, but because it burns slow and warm. Some bands even freeze dry meat on racks in this air, creating a leathery delicacy. Your future self would mark it as ancestral jerky. Historians still argue whether the long night songs and rituals are mostly for meaning or mostly for memory, and the honest answer is probably both. Joke 3, you privately note that anything sung off key clearly leans toward memory. You crest the final swell and see it a shallow basin, ringed by brush, darker than the rest of the night. You smell smoke thin as a thread and catch a quick silver glance, a watchful figure measuring your gait and deciding you are kin, or at least not trouble. You lift your hand as elders taught you palm-wide nothing in it, but the day's miles, and the figure lifts theirs back. Somewhere below the rim, a lamp size, a pot ticks as it cools. A baby coughs, then decides against further comment. Behind you, the ice miles glare in patient silence. Ahead, the promise of heat and voices. Between them, you a thin thread of warmth, stitched through the cold, learn to make a night like this not only survivable, but whisper it beautiful. The secret isn't a gadget, it's attention. You notice how the snow speaks, how your breath writes its brief letters, how the wind and land hold a conversation older than language. In that, noticing the ice age stops being a monster under the bed and becomes a stern teacher with excellent posture. You step into the basin and feel the wind pause at the rim as if it has reached the end of its shift. Someone begins a story. Someone else adds a heartbeat on a high drum. Sparks climb and vanish into the velvet. Frost glitters on hair stars, nested in stars, a galaxy stitched into a sleeve. You breathe once, twice, and walk toward the ember's small sun, ready to learn how people make warmth last a whole winter night. You edge closer to the ember's little sun and learn the oldest winter physics lesson. Heat is precious, movement is expensive, wind is a thief. You treat warmth like water in a cracked jar. Seal every seam slow, every leak. Keep a trickle of fire alive, even when the flames pretend to sleep. The band gathers you in, and a pair of deft hands tugs your hood snug. Hair side out so drifting snow skates off instead of melting in. You rub a smear of fat along your cheekbones where the wind keeps trying to sculpt you. It shines like moonlight, and yes, it's practical moisturizer with a side gig as a windbreak. Your earlier ember mouse blinks again from its nest of fungus and bark, and you realize tonight's survival is a choreography the coals, the hides, the breath of everyone here moving like a slow, sure dance. Clothing is your portable shelter, and someone here takes tailoring seriously. A needle of polished bone glides through hide sinew thread, nipping the edges together with tiny, smug bites. Mainstream fact, folded neatly into the rhythm, archaeologists have found eyed bone needles tens of thousands of years old. Little proof that people weren't just draping hides. They were shaping them to bodies, making sleeves that hug wrists and hoods that cup faces. You roll your shoulders and feel the sense behind layers inner plant fiber for wicking twisted nettle or bast, mid-layer of soft, low-loft fur for trapped air, outer cloak with hair turned out for snow shedding and wind sass. Somewhere a fashion week is jealous, but out here the runway is the horizon, and the only applause you want is from your fingers when they keep moving. Joke 1, your mittens clap very quietly because mittens. Boots matter most the minute you forget them. Your pair are high, the cuffs tied over the shin soles, padded with dry grass that crackles faintly when you step. A strip of hide wraps your ankle like a promise. You learn to swap the stuffing each night so tomorrow's miles don't feel like walking on frozen sponges. Someone holds up a trick. You'll love the foot bag. Think soft sock made of mammal with ideas stuffed with shredded bark to wick sweat away before it turns your toes into icicles with opinions. To keep edges from icing up, a smear of oil on seams becomes your seamstress's secret handshake. Historians still argue whether Neanderthal wardrobes looked more like clever capes or fully fitted layers with stitched sleeves. But either way, smart dressing is the difference between heroic hunter and driftwood with good cheekbones. You sit by the hearth and the fire breathes like an animal at rest. Not a bonfire to brag about those leak heat upward and make the spirits of fuel shake their heads, but a long, low flame backed by a reflector wall of stone and logs that throws warmth at your shins. The hearth has favorite chores, drying gear, thawing thoughts, and simmering broth from bones that would otherwise be nothing but history lessons. You learn the old trick of banking the fire under ash before sleep so coals smolder until morning. It's like tucking a child in, except the child can relight your universe at dawn. Quirky tidbit for your pocket. Some bands carry coals between camps in a hollowed antler capped with clay, or inside a tinder fungus that smokes like a very patient dragon. It's the prehistoric equivalent of portable charger, and yes, it's always at 1%. Joke 2, you whisper low power mode, and the ember pretends not to hear you. Fire also grows from stones. The click of flint and pyrite sends a firefly of sparks into tender fuzz. The bow drill hums its small song until dust glows and the hand drill turns blister into miracle. You feel how much craft lives in those first seconds breath, coaxed to be bellows, hands cupped to be walls, eyes soft so smoke can be teacher and not bully. The camp keeps a hierarchy of kindling dry grass and shredded bark, then twig as thin as a promise finger-thick branches, wrist-thick logs. The long night teaches patience. You feed the newborn flame like it's shy then, like it's hungry, then like it's a teenager raiding the pantry. From the roof poles hang jackets of steam and snow. You turn yours inside out to dry the inner face, while the outer face keeps its cold armor. A braided cord holds amulets and tools, but more importantly, it keeps things off the floor where frost likes to gossip. Smoke threads out a hole barely and pauses above your head to set insects and lurkers on notice. As a bonus, it leans a hand toward preserving hides. Historians still argue whether smokehouses in the deep past were specialized structures or just careful arrangements around a hearth. But your nose registers the outcome either way. Food keeps gear. Last nights feel a little less sharp. You watch a pot of stones boil water. Yes, stones. Heat smooth river rocks in the fire, then plop them into a skin bag or bark bowl and listen to the hiss and think, okay, wizard. The broth turns glossy. A layer of fat beads and then melts back like a dream you almost held. That fat is money. It oils leather lights, lamps, and worked into your hair and beard resists frost. Quirky but true aside, a dab of finely powdered charcoal under the eyes cuts shoe glare. It's not fashion, it's physics though, feel free to call it both. A child fingers your sleeve and you show them the stitches overcast whip running. The language of thread. You demonstrate how to cinch a hood so breath steers away from your cheeks, and how to pinch the mittens so blood visits your fingertips, often enough to keep gossiping. You pass on the quiet hysteria of don't sweat the paradox that to stay warm, You must first refuse heat's flattery. Move yes, sprint no. Peel a layer before work, add it back while breath still fogs, but sweat hasn't won. You open your parka to the cold like shaking hands with an enemy, then close it again when the truce holds. Joke 3, you call this maneuver temperature diplomacy, and the diplomats in camp are the only ones who never lose their hats. At the edge of the firelight, someone rubs ochre into a cracked heel, then seals it with grease. Another sews a small pouch to hold a lump of birch tar, that sticky miracle made by baking bark in a low-oxygen kiln. It mends seams, waterproofs stitches, and pretends to be superglue whenever your kit makes a desperate rattle. Mainstream fact again. People were cooking birch tar long before pottery, which means minds learned to trap heat and starve fire of air to coax out chemistry. Quiet genius hiding inside a smoky trench. You don't say genius out loud. You just nod to the old hands who know how long a log must lie before it becomes trustworthy, how small a hole can still let a flame breathe, how far a spark can travel in a fox fur. When the wind rises, you pivot the fire's manners. You set a second smaller blaze to serve as a reflector or hang a hide as a windbreak, so warmth stops running away. You learn that fire is not only heat, it's light for work, for calm, for the kind of chatter that frees a mind from counting minutes. Someone hums, someone else carves, someone retells the time your ancestor fell into a drift and came out wearing half the prairie, which is a comedy of burrs that becomes a lecture about brushing down gear before bed. The laugh first, the lesson after an old pattern. Before you sleep, you help with the nightly inspection check. Laces for ice. Tip your boots upside down so the cold doesn't settle in like a landlord. Pull your bed of hides close and shake it once to evict any lingering snow. You bank the coals with a careful sigh of ash. Tuck a tiny ember into the fungus cradle for security and put a hand on the warm stones that ring the hearth. They hold the day like a memory, and you borrow a little for your feet. Historians still argue whether round or elongated hearths were better for heat distribution in certain shelters, and you have the luxury of not carrying the stones answer you with quiet, convincing warmth. When you finally slide into the thick hide fur toward skin, another fur above, you feel microclimates bloom. Your breath makes a cave. Your toes stop narrating their miseries. Outside, snow frets along the walls, testing them the way wolves test a herd. Inside, a red pearl of coal keeps a low, faithful pulse. The camp's heartbeat that says, "See you in the morning." Warmth here is not an accident. It's a culture of stitching, tending, greasing, watching, sharing. You drift with that thought, and with one more small smile tomorrow, the ember mouse travels again, and you properly dressed, properly fed, and smugly moisturized will travel with it. Morning leans pale across the basin, the wind doing its usual performance review of every seam, and you start thinking less about walking and more about where you'll sleep the next nights. Shelter becomes your second skin when clothing can't carry all the responsibility. You read the land like a face, cheekbones of limestone, a smile of willow thicket, a furrow where snow lies deeper but quieter. You don't chase cozy. You manufacture it, one deliberate choice at a time until blizzards fade into background noise, and the world outside your wall sounds like a river of feathers. A scout points with their chin toward a cliff pocked by shallow mouths. Caves are the dream option, ready-made, pre-insulated rent, payable in soot. You approach with caution because caves belong to more than you. Owls, bears, spirits, and your own imagination. The entrance tells a story. Fresh tracks stamped like signatures. A drift line rolled up like a welcome mat. A ceiling frosted with breath. You coax the ember mouse into a tiny flame and step in, testing the air, listening for the throat clearing of a resident you'd prefer not to argue with. The floor slopes back. The roof lifts. There's an alcove where a hearth could sit without bruising the ceiling. A mainstream detail threads in softly deep caves from Ice Age Europe, preserve stacked ash layers and soot-varnished ceilings, evidence of repeated wintering and careful hearth placement. You map the draft with your cheek place, a stone where smoke wants to gather, and imagine stories echoing to the bone like warm water. Joke 1, you call it open plan, which is accurate until the wind attends the housewarming. But caves are rare on the open steppe, so you practice the art of building weather where none exists. First comes the windbreak. You plant stakes, weave brush and ribs, and cloak the frame with hides hair out, so snow skitters away instead of melting in. A low stone wall arcs behind the hearth to throw heat back into your lap. In front of the sleeping line, you scrape a shallow trench, a cold sink, where the grumpiest air will slouch and mind its own business. Suddenly, a wolf-thin fire feels generous. You sit in the lee and listen to the wind complaining to itself, which is the nicest sound in winter. Historians still argue whether some of these semi-open windbreak camps served as quick hunting blinds or as long-stay bases with rotating crews. Either way, the solution tastes of good judgment. Snow. The same bully that gnaws your toes turns ally if you treat it right. You cut blocks from wind-packed drifts with an antler blade or a sharpened shoulder blade and lay them in offset rings, spiraling inward keystone, last a white shell, rising in patient breaths. Vents stay small and high. The doorway stoops low and tunnels out, so warm air shrugs and stays. Inside the walls, glaze with your lamp's soft breath, and the snow consolidates into a quiet, solid mainstream physics call-out. Packed snow traps air and insulates so well that with a lamp and steady company, a shelter's interior can hover around freezing, even when the night outside bites far below. Joke 2. You dub the result. IKEA Ice Age Edition assembly required Allen key not included. If the snow is too sugary for blocks, you go Quingy. Instead, pile a mound, let it sinter, then hollow it with patient scoops, checking the roof with a measuring stick and common sense. You keep the sleeping ledge higher than the entry and polish the inside so meltwater doesn't drip its tiny percussion on your forehead at 3 a.m. Historians still argue whether snow houses were common in temperate Pleistocene zones, or whether that skill flourished mostly among later high Arctic peoples. Your hands don't wait for the footnotes, they learn what the snow on this ridge will do today. Then there are the great bone houses of memory. On a windy rise, you erect a circle of mammoth bones, leg shafts like pillars, tusks arched as doorways lash them with rawhide chink cracks, with sod and snow, then skin the skeleton in hides until it becomes a low, warm dome. A hearth glows near the center. Sleeping benches curve around the wall. Mainstream fact worth savoring, archaeologists have uncovered mammoth bone dwellings dating roughly 14 to 15,000 years ago along the Dnieper and in the Ukrainian plains, with rings of bones hearths and worked ivory suggesting winter base camps. Historians still argue whether those houses were permanent seasonal homes or specialized hunting stations. But anyone who has felt a north wind tugging at their eyebrows recognizes the point. Mass becomes comfort when you arrange it with care. Not every night deserves an architectural statement. Sometimes the answer is a half-dug snow trench roofed with poles and hides the kind of place that looks like a shrug from the outside and feels like a handshake inside. Sometimes it's a rock overhang dressed with a brush skirt that turns a bully wind into a mutter. Sometimes it's an earth berm you build with your feet as much as your hands kicking snow into the seam where ground and comfort don't yet agree. You carry spare stakes and cordage rolled like a dream. You can unspool quickly because weather rarely schedules meetings before it arrives. Entrances are where warmth escapes and trouble arrives, so you get fussy with them. A low tunnel-like door makes you bow excellent for humility and heat conservation. A hanging hide becomes both a door and a mood lifted, and the world barges in. Drop it, and the world hits a polite pause. You weight the bottom edge with pebbles so it doesn't flip sassily at the first gust, and you angle the doorway away from the prevailing wind so the house doesn't inhale cold with every sigh. Quirky tidbit for the road. Some folks tuck warmed stones inside the door flap hem at night. It keeps the curtain obedient and gives the first person up a blissfully toasty handhold. Inside any shelter, you stage manage the climate. Sleeping platforms of woven willow springy spruce boughs or dry grasses lift you above the cold sink. A lamp of stone or shell fed with rendered fat becomes nightlight and humidity coach in one gentle flame. You set a shallow tray of small coals to pre-warm footbags. You line the walls with quilts of stitched hides fur inward for softness, leather outward for resilience. Fresh spruce bedding doesn't just cushion. Its resin scent politely discourages tiny freeloaders who would love to share your warmth. You respect smoke like a temperamental housemate. Baffles guide. Advents court it, and patience keeps you from picking a fight. A back eddy under the dome helps roll smoke toward the outlet while leaving the breathing zone clear. You learn the personalities of fuels willow that hisses birch, that burns clean bone that smolders long, and you bank the fire with ash before sleep, so the ember mouse can blink until dawn. Another mainstream detail for your mental toolkit. In some shelters, archaeologists read stacked hearths and resurfaced floors like tree rings of occupation. Each layer a winter's worth of stories tamped into earth and ash. Afternoons become your architecture school. You brace roofs against snow load with a lattice of ribs. You tamp snow walls so they strengthen without slumping. You practice the sacred geometry of not too close, not too far when placing the hearth from the wall. To borrow a sip of daylight, you fit a thin translucent hide high on the lee side, a pale window that smears sunlight into the room, just enough to lift the gloom. Your tools aren't flashy, an antler adds, a flake scraper, a bone awl and patience measured in heartbeats. Joke 3, you introduce yourself to the camp as a ventilation engineer, which is accurate and also sounds more official than person who pokes holes and sniffs the air. Evening folds in, and you make the last rounds. You crack the vent so it won't drift shut at 3 a.m. when dreams are at their juiciest. You smooth the floor so stray coals can't skitter into mischief. You brush gear down so tomorrow you won't wake wearing several grams of the outdoors. Gloves and footbags hang where the lamp can tell them a warm bedtime story. A ring of stones along the hearth's edge holds the day's heat. You tuck your toes near one and sigh like a kettle coming just to the edge of song. Finally, you lie back, ears full of the muffled hiss of snow and the tiny applause of fat in the lamp. The wind rakes the world and decides your house is less interesting than it hoped. Your shelter doesn't brag. It simply works shaped to the land, tuned to the air, stitched by hands that know where heat hides and where cold prowls. You smile in the dimness, an architect with cold cheeks and warm feet, practicing the fine art of temperature diplomacy in your sleep. Outside, the night writes long lines against your walls. Inside, your breath makes a small cave of weather that belongs to you and everyone breathing beside you. Dawn is a pale bruise on the horizon when you step out to read the snow like mail. Hoofprints emboss the crust, 2 claws of reindeer, round stamps of bison, the big pear-shaped bowl of mammoth, when you're lucky and ready. You lick a fingertip. Yes, it freezes. Yes, you regret it and test the breeze. You want your scent to ride downstream while you move like a quiet roomer upriver. Your spear leans balanced on your shoulder, the foreshaft snug in its socket, the sinew bindings varnished with glue and pride. Behind you, others ghost along the runner, with legs like braided rope, the older hunter, whose laugh you trust more than weather. The toolkeeper who carries the ember mouse and the repair kit that can make a spearhead apologize for chipping at a bad moment. Herds rule this country the way tides rule coasts. They scroll across the steppe in lines that look like handwriting from the sky. Mainstream fact to slip in. While your breath fogs, archaeologists have uncovered mammoth and bison kill and butchery sites from the Ice Age heaps of bones, flaked blades, and fractured long bones. For marrow, evidence of coordinated hunts and swift processing, before cold could turn helpful and predators could turn inconvenient. You've seen the logic yourself. pick terrain that does half the work, then become the other half. Today, the ridge ahead funnels into a snow-choked gully. You and the scouts plant brush flags, tall twigs wearing scraps of hide along the flanks. Pray read those lines as obstacles. They nudge away from flutter and shadow toward your chosen path. Down in the gully's mouth, a waist-high snowbank waits like a soft gate. You tuck behind a willow screen, glance at your neighbor's steady hands. Calm, blink, and feel your pulse settle into the same rhythm as the wind rattling the catkins. Historians still argue whether these mass drives were steady season strategies or rare ceremonial thunderclaps when conditions aligned. But either way, you breathe the old choreography into your bones. The herd rounds the bend. Reindeer first cautious as accountants, then bison with shoulders like weather fronts, and far behind the gray-brown hill that walks a mammoth matriarch, snow smoking from her back. She tests the air doubts. The flags doubts you more and pushes forward because the calves want the path tamped and simple. You clench nothing. You let your breath be a small, quiet animal. When the lead animals balk at the flutter line, runners rise from cover arms, wide voices a hiss and clack of stones. The herd pours the way you planned, down the throat of the gully, over the soft gate. You step out, and time goes syrup slow and needle sharp, all at once. Your spear thrower, the atlatl, lifts a lever that turns your arm into a longer arm. Joke 1, it's basically the prehistoric extendable selfie stick, but the only photo it takes is of dinner. The dart flexes, breathes, and flies. Others fly with it, a swarm of long, straight pinions. They land where they're meant to, high ribs behind shoulder, always with respect. The animals lunge forward, snow buckles. You keep your feet and your promise to move cleanly, because the next minutes are a covenant between hunger and skill. The herd splits, most surging away, a few stumbling in the drift. You close the distance, not for gory spectacle, but for responsibility to end what you have begun without waste or show. In the hush that follows, the world exhales. You touch the animal's shoulder in thanks, because your elders do, and because rituals are containers for feelings that would otherwise slosh and spill. Then the fast work starts, the kind that turns cold into a collaborator. Knives come out long flakes, with edges fresh as moonlight. A thrusting wedge opens the hide. Hands that know how not to slip make broad, efficient cuts. A prying rib becomes a lever. You think like a traveler packing a small sled. What must move first? What can wait? What will freeze happily if you let the air kiss it? Meat comes in slabs. Fat gets its own place, because fat is warmth you can eat and lamp you can burn. Marrow waits inside the long bones, a secret your people never keep. Mainstream technique note: while you work stone boiling with heated rocks in hide bags, turns chopped bone into bone grease. A rich render that fortifies dried meat and makes leather listen when you ask it to be waterproof. People have roles without speeches. The elder sorts tendons, future thread, and bowstring, because sinew is a promise you can spin. Someone peels the stomach out whole. Later cleaned and turned, it will become a waterproof bag for fat or a winter soup pot. Quirky but true tidbit you'll retell at camp: an inflated bladder tied with a thong makes a good buoy for river crossings, and a surprisingly effective toy for children who invent ball games because the universe likes games. Another pair stacks ribs in twos like sled runners. You've learned to lash a bundle that slides instead of fights, to wax the runners with a smear of tallow, because even hauling can be civilized. Joke 2. You call it mammoth-grade furniture polish and get one tired smile which counts. Nothing is just leftovers. The hide split and squared is a tent wall next month and footbags next season. The skull's thick plate becomes anvil and story bench. The shoulder blade makes a wind shovel. The small fine bones become needles and whistles. Even the hooves will melt down to glue that steps lightly across years. Historians still argue whether Ice Age diets leaned heavily toward big game by necessity, or toward broader anything that moves and many things that don't menus. Your hands insist on the answer the land offers tonight. fill the baskets you have, then make new baskets. Predators attend the ceremony of meat the way ravens attend gossip. Wolves watch from the ridge, respectful distance, measured in yellow eyes. A lion, a ghost of muscle and frost, tests your perimeter with a slow, bored yawn that fools no one. Your own perimeter answers with voices and a ring of spears, the ember mouse blinking in its nest, because fire talks in a language every carnivore understands. You cache what you can't haul bundles buried in snow pits, sealed with a mat of willow and a stamp of clean snow. You strew spruce needles around to confuse curious noses and mark the place with a private constellation, 3 stones like Orion's belt, a shaved willow on the lee signposts, only your band reads. On the trek back, you trade shoulders and jokes. The sleds whisper on the hardpack, and you don't mind the ache because it's the price of tomorrow's lamp, tomorrow's broth, tomorrow's laughter. At camp, the work relaxes into cooking. Stones shuttled from the fire hiss in a stomach bag full of snowmelt and bone. The broth grows the color of old gold and smells like home. Someone shaves slivers, paper thin, and drops them in hot pot Ice Age style. You cut long strips to hang by smoke, and you pound lean meat to stiff confetti that will later marry bone grease in compact travel cakes. Joke 3, you promise to workshop a better brand name than Ancestral Meat Brick, but the focus group is busy chewing. Sharing has rules that taste like fairness. The person whose spearhead made the fatal wound gets honor sure, but the camp gets the calories and elders with thin arms get the first ladle. Kids learn the currency of wait your turn and say thank you. You learn the economy of giving away your own extra because everyone remembers who keeps the circle smooth. Mainstream cultural echo across hunting societies, customs often tie meat ownership to weapon or first blood, but distribution bends toward collective survival. Prestige travels with generosity, more than with hoarding. By lamplight, the quirky inventory continues. You braid a few hairs from the matriarch's flank into a charm because luck likes symbols. You rub a little fat into your boots and a little into your eyebrows because fashion is whatever keeps your eyebrows attached. You tie a set of short bones into a rattle that will be used later when stories need drums softer than thunder. Historians still argue whether certain bone piles and arranged vertebrae at ancient sites are ritual traces, practical drying racks, or just winter's clutter wearing archaeology's patience thin. You hum, you tidy, you keep both possibilities in your pocket. When the pot is mostly silence and the lamp mostly glow, you lean back against your rolled hide and feel the rightness ripple out. Stock drive, finish, honor, share, same dough. The Ice Age turns enormous problems into small, solvable tasks, and you line them up like footprints until the day agrees to be walked. Your mind drifts to tomorrow's errands. Check the cache, turn the racks, scrape the hide, twist more sinew, and to the long, slow migration of herds, you'll shadow when the moon fattens again. Out beyond the shelter, your flags still flutter. Out beyond them, wolves speak in their tidy punctuation, and the stars approve whatever plan the wind will allow. You bank the coals with a graceful palmful of ash, feed the ember mouse, and let the camp's quiet singing tuck itself around your shoulders. Nothing wasted, everything used. Even your breath visible for a heartbeat as it leaves you. Looks a little like smoke and a little like a blessing. Tools spill out of the day like sparks from the hearthstone for edges, bone for grace, fiber for the quiet miracles in between. You sit where the light is kind and the wind is opinionated but distant, and you start with a rock that looks like it has secrets. A flint core turns in your palm. Your antler billet kisses its edge with a practiced thunk. A blade peels away, long and thin, the color of dark ice. You feel the geometry talk through your wrist platform angle follow through, and you retouch the edge with a narrow antler tine until it bites the air. Mainstream fact to anchor your rhythm. Ice Age makers perfected prepared core methods and blade production, so a single cobble could yield a bouquet of sharpness blades, bladelets, and microblades that slip neatly into handles and foreshafts. You arrange them like a deck of winter cards, scrapers for hides, burins for carving channels, backed bladelets for cutting sinew without chewing your own fingertips. Joke one muttered to the pile. You're all sharp enough to moderate a comment section. Bone joins the party because bone is wood that learns patience in cold places. You split metapodials for long straight blanks. You rasp them smooth with sandstone until they glow like ivory snow. You press a groove with a burin and pinch the shavings out with your thumbnail. Awls appear first little unicorn horns that poke holes through hide without screaming at it. Then needles, the royalty of cold weather survival, thin, polished-eyed. The first stitch feels like a promise to tomorrow's toes. A lissoir, a slicker tool, from rib polishes leather until it shrugs off wet like gossip. Meanwhile, antler becomes foreshaft, and socket pressure flaker, and wedge, a kind of tool family tree branching under your hands. Historians still argue whether antler points took more of the hunting load than stone in certain regions, or whether they tag-teamed by season and prey. But your kit treats antler like an honored elder, springy, tough, forgiving, when stone chips at the worst time. Fiber sits quietly and does 90% of the work. You pound dried tendons until they flower into white threads. You tease plant bast from nettle and linden with the patience of a saint who owns a comb. Twist 2 strands. One way, lay them over a third, twisted the other way, and cord is born S over Z'd, a tiny braid that refuses to quit. Quirky tidbit you grin about sometimes, you soften sinew by tucking it in your cheek as you work, which means ice-aged chewing gum comes with 100% more useful protein and 0% bubble potential. Also, not a snack. Mainstream flex you share over your shoulder. A fragment of 3-ply cord, more than 40,000 years old, tells us minds were spinning thread long before anyone spun a wheel. Adhesives are winter's cunning. You set a small pit roof it with flat stones, wrap birch bark into tight rolls and smother a fire until it sulks. The bark sweats into tar black stubborn, faintly sweet, one of the world's first made materials. You warm a lump on a twig mix in a whisper of charcoal, maybe a breath of beeswax when you can steal it from summer. Then smear the gloss into a socket before the foreshaft slides home. Hafting becomes chemistry class at midnight, resin, sinew, and compression making an alliance stronger than any single piece. Historians still argue whether Neanderthals or later cousins baked the best birch tar with pits, with above-ground double pot tricks, with clever oxygen control. But everyone agrees the stuff turns a stone edge into a weapon that stays a weapon. Joke 2. You admit the smell is forest brownie, which is not edible, you've checked. You keep a fix-it roll as precious as fat spare bladelets, wrapped in moss so they don't chip each other's sinew. Cords braided fine wood wedges, a sliver of antler for pressure flaking on the go, and a sticky nugget of pitch tucked in a shell. The spear you carry is a composite creature wooden shaft antler socket stone point, because winter hates single points of failure. The foreshaft is quick to swap. The bindings are cross-lashed. The glue is proud but flexible. You drill holes with a bow drill, thrum smoke, and the handhold stone leaves a polite dimple in your palm. When you heat treat chert under embers for a while, the flakes sing a brighter note, the edges glacier. Not every rock likes this spa day, but the ones that do cut like rude starlight. Over by the fire, someone carves barbs into a long, elegant bone harpoon, daydreams made real. Mainstream fact, threading through the lamplight, by the late Ice Age barbed bone harpoons, flourish across the north, perfect for fish under ice and seals when luck and nerve meet opportunity. A split willow toggling head waits on the mat tied with a quick-release knot you can work with mittens. You chalk a notch pattern into your memory, 1 notch for shallow water, 2 for deeper so the right head comes to hand without drama. Historians still argue whether bows were widespread in these latitudes before the big thaw, or whether spear throwers ruled until much later. Your camp leans at ladle for heavy work with light dart experiments that keep evenings interesting. Wood gets its due even when trees are sparse. You favor straight-grained willow and birch. You steam a stave over the potbend, it patiently against a knee, and let sinew bindings tell it which direction to remember. Skids and hand sleds grow from withes and crossbars. Runners get rubbed with tallow until they forget about friction. A travois 2 poles and a cross brace drags bundles like a polite pet moose. Joke 3, you name yours, Sled Zeppelin, and refuse to explain the joke even when asked which is half the fun of a joke. Metal is a rumor from far futures, so you ask edges to be smart. Your scraper shoulders are steep, so they don't crumble on dry hide. Your knives are thin at the business end, thick where fingers pinch. Burins split into fresh graving tips when the old one tires. Old blades retire into new careers. Microburins gravers, tiny saws because everything gets at least 3 lives. You strop edges on frozen leather dusted with fine sand, a winter barber for flint. The kit lives in layers like your clothes, a quick pouch for field fixes, a roll for big moods, a cache for big plans. Light matters. You ladle rendered fat into a limestone lamp. Remember that one? And twist a wick from plant fiber and hair. The flame is stubborn, bookish, friendly to sewing and stories. Mainstream nod upper Paleolithic lamps turn up in caves with sooted ceilings and tidy hearths, a constellation of house lights from deep time. You trim the wick with a sliver of bone so it doesn't smudge the air, and you set a polished flake nearby to bounce a little light into your hands. Shadows cooperate. Stitches fall true. Time slows to the pace of thread. There's a whole subculture of tying things so they behave. You learn hitches that hold under frost lashings that don't creep when they thaw, and splices you can feel in the dark. A rawhide thong, shrunken wet on dry, pinches a socket like a clamp. A braided cord spreads load, so a sled rail doesn't complain. You alternate sinew with plant fiber because each ages with a different sense of humor. And you collect little helper's cattail fluff that takes sparks like gossip punkwood that smolders long and patient a disk of tinder fungus for when the ember mouse needs a travel buddy. Not everything in the kit is solemn. Someone has a bone flute with paint freckles that always squeaks its first note like a door with opinions. Someone else keeps a tiny scraper polished to a mirror for checking whether ash or charcoal is still on their cheeks. Quirky but true aside, lumps of chewed birch pitch survive with tooth marks pressed into them. Ancient gum that probably softened glue-soothed teeth, or just gave a nervous mouth something to do while watching a pot refuse to boil. You grin. You soften a bit of sinew in your cheek. You do not blow bubbles. By now, the pile in front of you isn't tools so much as a language. Every edge says a verb slice, scrape, pierce, pry drill, polish, pull. The verbs braid into a winter sentence that reads, "We planned for this." Historians still argue whether certain regional styles shouldered points. Here-backed microliths there signal different peoples, different teachers, or different prey. But in your lap, all those typologies resolve into one thing, a kit that works when the wind goes looking for trouble. You tuck the last bladelet into its moss, lay the bow drill by the ember mouse, like 2 old friends, and sweep the chips into a neat crescent that crunches like frost under your heel. The night outside has teeth, yes, but your bag now has answers with edges, and that feels like warmth, even before the lamp agrees. The map you trust most is not on bark or bone, it's folded into your walk. You rise before the sky decides on a color and start threading familiar beads on an invisible string, the willow bend that hums with bees in warm moons, the limestone teeth where reindeer funnel the bluff that throws a noon shadow like a spear toward the creek. You call this loop your round winter basin. Spring melt summer grays, autumn fat, and you move it. The way a singer moves a melody, coming back to themes that never get old because survival keeps them fresh. The ember mouse rides in its fungus cradle, your portable sunrise, while Sled Zeppelin trails behind with a dignified squeak. Rivers are your highways, even when they pretend to be floors. You read their frozen spines for news, a buckle where a spring seeps a line of hoarfrost, That means a trickle runs underneath a scatter of willow fluff that says in a handful of days, the first open water will sketch itself at the bend. Mainstream fact for your traveling: pocket many Ice Age camps cluster near watercourses with archaeological layers showing repeated seasonal use. Winter shelters at leaside terraces, spring stations where fish runs pass autumn sites near nut and seed abundance. You don't say logistics. You say we know where the river remembers us, and your feet nod. The sky joins your route like an old friend who never insists on being right, but usually is. The great wheel of stars turns slow and bossy. The pole of the sky is not always the same finger in every age, and elders remind you of that whenever a youngster brags about finding north. What you learn instead are patterns, a crooked ladle that pours at midnight. This part of winter, a bright wanderer that hovers low near dawn. A belt that tilts like a hunter choosing a path. Historians still argue whether certain etched lines on bone and plaquettes record star paths, river bends both or neither. Your camp treats the sky as a reliable co-teacher and lets the debate enjoy its evening off. Joke 1, you call this system GPS Grandparent Positioning System. And yes, it gets excellent reception. Wind is a gossip you learn to eavesdrop on. It brings the sweet animal warmth of bison long before your eyes agree. Salt on those rare days the world tastes of sea ice far to the north, the resin sigh of spruce as you climb out of grass country. You mark turnings by scent as much as by view, the place where the earth smells mineral and old, the bend that always comes with a whiff of river mud and sun-warmed stone. Quirky tidbit: some travelers carry a tiny pouch of crushed sweetgrass or pine needles to reset the nose after long, scentless cold. A little olfactory compass that reminds the brain how to notice. You take a pinch now and then, like waking up a map that lives behind your eyes. Along the way, you add your own small signposts. A cairn of 3 stones flat round means good crossing below. A shaved willow on the lee side of a dune says friend fire here last winter. Your ochre stick draws a neat stripe on a pale boulder where the trail disappears into a plain of deceitful sameness. You do not leave marks like a conqueror. You leave them like a correspondent, sending letters to yourself. Mainstream note folded into your stride across Pleistocene and later. Hunter-gatherer landscapes, alignments of stones. Drive lanes and repeated site features suggest intentional marking of movement corridors. Historians still argue whether some of those marks are communal highways or private messages between kin bands. Your answer is politely practical, both when we're wise. Seasonal decisions feel like weather and play like chess. Spring. You move early to catch fish trapped in back eddies as ice breaks setting wicker traps and teasing them with bone hooks polished to deceitful charm. Early summer, you climb to breezier ridges where bites and heat lose interest, and birds leave eggshell clues to berry patches ripening below. Late summer, you return to river flats to cut and dry plants whose names taste like leaf and sun on your tongue. Autumn, you circle nut groves and seed meadows, shaking, winnowing, roasting, catching, because winter respects those who bank calories like stories. Joke 2, you call your caching strategy interest-bearing, and yes, withdrawals require a warm stick and a good memory. Memory has architecture. You build a path palace, rooms made of places. The willow bend stores a lesson about crossing ice. The limestone teeth house the story of the time your cousin outran a storm by thinking like wind. The bluff where the shadow points keeps the recipe for bone grease and the verse that helps you not mess up the ratio. You tack new knowledge into old rooms where the wolves denned this year, where the snow lingered, where the tubers fattened late against everyone's expectations. Mainstream whisper oral mapping songs, stories, and named landmarks carries practical wayfinding data across generations. People don't just remember routes, they rehearse them aloud. Historians still argue whether certain myth cycles encode deep time climate events, or if we humans are simply talented at hearing pattern in everything. Either way, your songs get you there. You travel with neighbors even when you don't see them. Trails braid drift apart, rejoin like rivers. At a high fording place, you find footprints. You know, broad heel missing, left middle toe, that friends, and a shell pendant hung on a twig that says, passed through at dawn, all well heading to the nut place. Gifts move along these paths like messengers. A blade of glossy black stone from weeks away arrives wrapped in nettle cord. Your people answer with a bundle of smoked fish and a story that knows how to travel. Quirky possibility. Campfire chewed all winter. A few of the etched portable art pieces you trade may be pocket maps. The bend, the ford, the notch of hill against horizon. Though you're honest about the fact that sometimes art is exactly itself. Weather edits plans, and you edit with it. When the thaw comes too hard and fast, you keep to higher ground and avoid river ice that looks like glass and acts like trapdoor. When a cold snap grinds its teeth into late spring, you expand the mushroom search along ash and birch lean on caches dug months ago, and shift the meeting place with cousins to a lee crater where the wind can't overhear the menu. Historians still argue whether the speed of certain late glacial climate jolts stadials interstadials, forced wholesale route changes, or just made old loops wobble. What you know is that elders carry alternative verses in their heads backups for when the land sings in a different key. Herds decide much, but not everything. You shadow reindeer migrations like a careful echo, letting them show you the passes and fords they've spent centuries perfecting. You time your moves so calves have strong legs before you try to read their parents' minds. But you also have your own clock, the tubers in that south slope that sweeten. After the second frost, the seed heads that shatter if you arrive a week late, the fish with a run so short it feels like a rumor. Joke 3, you keep a calendar on your arm, which is to say, scratches you swear are meaningful, and not just evidence of a nettle with a sense of humor. Sometimes you cross country so open, it becomes a thought experiment in how to not get lost in a place that is nothing but horizon. You line up a distant hill with a nearer boulder and a closer drift, stitching a path that can't come unthreaded by daydreams. You check your shadow at false noon to see whether it's sulking east or west. You keep a pebble in your mouth to remind your throat not to dry out a trick a grandparent swears helps either by making you swallow more often or just by giving your brain something to do besides panic about the emptiness. Quirky tidbit earns its keep in winter glare. You finger the charcoal stripe under your eyes and mutter, thanks to the ancestor who first smeared soot there and discovered physics with style. Caches are your savings accounts, and you label them in a language only you and yours speak. 3 short willow pegs under a rock lip means fat and tools. A braided grass ring hung on a thorn says seeds do not feed the future wolves. You record each in your head palace and in the band's communal song. You revisit just enough to keep animals from claiming your deposit. Mainstream support for your caution repeated pit features and storage traces in late Ice Age sites hint at planned returns, not just wandering luck. You season your returns with humility. Sometimes the land withdraws a service fee in the shape of a fox with excellent taste. By the time autumn's shadow lengthens, your loop has looped and you nose back into winter quarters. Not because the calendar says so, but because your bones do. You tuck sled Zeppelin beside the windbreak, smooth the cache lids, hang markers out of the weather, and step into the shelter you built with summer's patience. Nothing written. Everything remembered. Your map is alive, adjusted by storms. Argued with by elders, sung into children who hum along before they know why. And as you bank the fire and the ember mouse blinks, you realize the great trick surviving an ice age is less about one big plan and more about 1,000 small landmarks strung on a cord of attention that never quite snaps. You ease into the day's softer work, the kind that keeps the fire polite, the tempers low, and the band stitched tighter than sinew. Out here, survival is a group project with no option to drop the class. and the syllabus is mostly common sense sung in harmony. You start by checking the watch roster. 2 sentinels at dawn, 2 at dusk, ears tuned for the creak of ice and the punctuation of wolves. The rotation shifts with the weather. The runner takes midday. The elder who hears snow think takes night, and anyone nursing a blister gets the glamorous job called sit, mend, and tell jokes. Joke 1, the benefits package, includes unlimited fresh air and a very competitive mitten plan. The camp runs on quiet agreements. Latrine downwind and downhill. Mittens covered and tamped so foxes don't write reviews. Water fetched from above the shelter so nothing interesting floats by the pot. A snow wall screens the meat rack. A second wall screens the nursery, which doubles as the gossip hub because infants love news. Sleeping lines are arranged like a family tree, drawn in hides pairs and small clusters gaps left for airflow and quick exits. Fire etiquette is its own constitution. No sudden handfuls of green wood. No oops with the lamp near the dry grass, and put the ember mouse to bed under ash before you put yourself there. You take your place at the morning council. No podium, no crown, just a circle that edits plans until they fit the day. Decisions bend toward those with the freshest knowledge. The trapper speaks for the river. The hide worker speaks for weather. The elder speaks for patterns older than anyone's knees. Mainstream anthropological echo to slip into your parka. Many mobile hunter-gatherer societies show strong leveling status is temporary. Leadership is situational and loud. Boasts get trimmed like frayed sinew. You feel that leveling in your bones. It keeps the darts flying true and the stories truer. Childcare is everyone's heartbeat. You tuck a baby into a carrier fur and leather out hood wide and swap in fresh padding sphagnum moss. A brilliant green sponge from warmer months, dried and kept for days like this. Quirky tidbit with a practical wink that moss is naturally antiseptic and absurdly absorbent, which makes it the Ice Age's favorite diaper and first aid dressing in one humble bundle. Older kids orbit important tasks, like small moons fetching willow shavings, softening sinew with very serious faces, learning hand signs so they can gossip silently with the sentinels. A grandmother hums while sorting nuts, and your mind nods toward a mainstream hypothesis. You, like elders, especially grandmothers, boost survival by feeding, minding, and teaching, extending care down the line so parents can hunt, mend, and map. Food is shared in ways that turn calories into trust. The morning stew ladles first to elders and nursing mothers, then to the watchers who froze their eyelashes off, then to the rest who pretend not to count ladles and absolutely do if only to make sure no one is missed. Big hunt rules stretch into daily habit. The hand that caught the fish doesn't walk away richer than the camp for long. The hand that sewed your mittens finds an extra sliver of fat in their bowl without anyone making an announcement about it. You've learned that prestige here travels with generosity. The person who gives most tends to carry the most stories, and stories are a kind of stored heat. Conflict gets handled before it grows legs. 2 cousins squabble over a scraper. The elder sets down a smooth talk stick, a polished rib warm from a palm. And the rule is simple. The stick makes sentences longer and voices softer. Each speaks while the other weaves cord because hands that are busy are less likely to throw opinions. The verdict is rarely dramatic. Sharpen both, swap tomorrow. Thank the tools for their patience. If tempers stay frosty, a chore exchange cools. The coal hunter scrapes hides for an afternoon. Hide worker checks snares at dawn. Joke 2, someone suggests trial by snow angel. The court declines on the grounds of comedy. Teaching is constant theatrical and mostly unscheduled. A master napper narrates with pauses, letting you fill the silence with guesses. A singer lines geography into a lullaby so toddlers learn the river like a chorus. A tracker sketches reindeer hoof patterns in ash, then scuffs them out so you remember with your feet, not just your eyes. Your favorite lesson today is temperature diplomacy, the performative art of losing a layer before work and winning it back before chill declares victory. You model it for a teen who thinks bravery is the same thing as sweat. You both laugh when your charcoal eye stripe Makes you look like a stealthy raccoon with aspirations. Roles exist, but they breathe. Women throw darts that fly true. Men weave cord that doesn't tangle. Elders hunt rabbits with patience and teach teenagers how not to step on their own shadow. Historians still argue whether the sexual division of labor was universal and strict in the deep past, or flexible and context-driven. Your camp replies with a shrug that looks a lot like competence whoever can does and whoever can't learns, except when custom says, not today, in which case you trade tasks, like singers trading harmonies. You keep an eye on fairness, the way you keep an eye on weather, not with drama, but with respect. Sanity is scheduled in, disguised as play. At midday, someone declares a contest of not falling down, secretly balanced training on icy logs for creek crossings. Another person leads a "oh who hears farthest" game, which is actually sentinel practice folded into laughter. Joke 3. The prize is bragging rights redeemable for 0 goods, which somehow everyone still wants. Laughter isn't decoration, it's oxygen for the group mood. You also budget quiet time to sit with the lamp and braid to give the mind a soft hallway to walk down when the wind yells at the door. Illness and injury don't make people invisible here. The cougher gets warm broth spiked with a bitter tea no one admits tastes fine. The hunter with a twisted ankle becomes the band's best arrow straightener overnight. Work adapts because people are not spare parts. They're the whole machine. Mainstream pattern you've quietly admired across winter fires, foragers often show long-healed fractures and lives extended well past peak hunting years. Bone-deep evidence that care is not a slogan, it's logistics. You turn care into errands, fresh bedding. A lamp moved closer, a lamp moved away when coughs need air. Signals knit the edges of camp to the world beyond the firelight. 3 soft clicks with stones mean, come see but calmly. A rising hum means wind trick, which gets everyone checking vents and hearthstones. Hand signs keep the night from filling with words. Palm flat for stay, 2 fingers for eyes. A gentle circle for all, okay. You rehearse them the way people in another age might rehearse passwords, then feed the ember mouse and make sure its nest is travel ready. Because nothing undermines group morale like a fire that refuses to move when the sky says go. Trade inside the camp is a friendly theater. A hide worker swaps a perfect seam for a day's help gathering tinder fungus. A storyteller, a real one with rhythm in their bones, earns extra marrow by singeing eyebrows less often than the competition. You bring out your small hoard, a bladelet of pretty stone, a spare toggling head, a tiny pouch of charcoal for under-eye glare. Control style and physics remember, and you bargain with smiles more than with lists. No one keeps score out loud. Everyone keeps song, the running tally of favors that turn strangers into neighbors and neighbors into kin. Custom also lives in the invisible places. Lovers keep their promises or dissolve them with gifts and witnesses. Adoptions happen in the open, because every pair of hands is a triumph over winter. When someone dies, the camp remembers the good parts loudly and the hard parts softly, and tools or beads pass to new owners with a story attached, so the object continues to belong to the living. Historians still argue whether grave goods in distant caves are mostly status, mostly affection, or mostly something we don't yet have words for. You touch a bead at your throat and decide affection is already complicated enough to count as all 3. When shadows grow long, you run the evening drill almost without thinking. Racks checked coals, banked sentinels, briefed doorway snow, brushed smooth so tracks read like sentences in the morning. The circle settles, and talk turns to tomorrow's loop, to the cache with the braided grass tag, to the cousin band who might meet you at the ford. The cooperation you feel isn't a speech. It's muscle memory, the same kind you trust when you throw a dart or tie a hitch in the dark. The ice age is big and indifferent. Your answer is small and stubborn: feed, mend, teach, share, repeat. Under the lamp's modest gold, you lean back and watch kindness queue up without fanfare. A bowl nudged closer to cold hands, a coal tipped toward a struggling wick. A story paused until the baby stops hiccuping. None of it makes the wind less sharp. All of it makes the night feel possible. And as you smooth the sleeping furs and hear the first watch take their places at the edge of the world, you understand the real rule out here: the best survival tool is plural. Night opens like a pouch of velvet, and you reach for the oldest tools that don't cut song story, and the kind of pictures that move even when stone pretends to stand still. The lamp your faithful ember mouse, grown bold, throws a small sun against the wall, and you start by warming your voice, the way you warm your hands, slow, patient, amused at your own squeak on the first note. You tap a hide with a rib bone beater, a heartbeat that tidy marches the camp into the same pace, and the air changes temperature inside your chest. Hunger and fear learn to keep quiet when rhythm asks nicely. Joke 1, you promise this will be a short drum solo. History thanks you. You paint memory so it won't wander. A dish of ochre mixed with fat and a pinch of marrow gleams like dawn. You thumb a patch across the wall. First, a line for the ridge, then a swell for the river bend, then the notched back of reindeer flowing. The way they actually move shoulders, leading bellies, floating a little tilt that only shows up when lamplight flickers. You cup the flame and watch the animals seem to step a trick belonging to both physics and faith. Mainstream fact: to hang your brush on Ice Age caves from what we'll later name France and Spain, places like Chauvet and Lascaux hold layered panels of aurochs, horses, bison, and deer, their bodies contoured to stone to make motion out of rock when light shivers across them. You're not copying a museum. You're rehearsing tomorrow and also yesterday in one soft line. Hands declare we were here with the same certainty as footprints. You lay your palm splay, your fingers, and blow pigment from a hollow bone, an airbrush older than pottery, leaving a negative hand that looks like a window into the wall. The child who helped twist sinew earlier demands a turn. Their tiny hand blooms beside yours, proof that small fingers can carry big stories. Historians still argue whether those hand stencils are signatures, clan marks, ritual acts, or a practical attendance sheet that says the band that hums in D was here. Your band shrugs and keeps painting. Meaning can be plural and still useful. The kit for this art is the same as the kit for survival. Charcoal you use to tame snow glare becomes the richest black. Ochres grind down into reds and yellows that stick because someone maybe you stole a dab of lamp fat for binder. Quirky tidbit you whisper because it makes people grin. Some painters melt a fleck of earwax into pigment to help it cling. It's not delicious, it's just helpful, which is practically the camp motto. Manganese lumps carried home for their midnight color also shave into powder that, when dusted on kindling, coaxes fire to take faster art, and heating technician, same rock, different mood. You don't only paint animals, you paint grammar. Lines, dots, ladders, ovals, feather shapes, signs that repeat the way ravens repeat jokes. A singer in another camp swears they count moons. Bah. Your map-making heart thinks of fords and ridges. A dreamer claims their doorways. Mainstream note clusters of recurring abstract signs show up across far-flung caves of visual vocabulary that outlives individual hands. Historians still argue whether those marks encode calendars, taboos, trail notes, or simply delight in pattern. Tonight, you use them as headers in the story you're about to stand inside. Story is a moving shelter. You retell the reindeer drive flags fluttering Snowgate, giving darts bending like long thoughts. And in the middle of the tale, you tuck a recipe, a route, a warning about a weak ice seam that looks like glass and behaves like trapdoor. The children lean forward for the drama and accidentally memorize the logistics. You tie the narrative to landmarks in the shadow of the bluff that points at noon at the willow bend that smells like bees in warm moons. So the mind learns the map, even while the mouth learns the music. Joke 2. You declare very seriously that Led Zeppelin made a cameo because even equipment deserves representation. Music keeps time for tasks that bore and for grief that won't sit still. Someone lifts a bone flute spotted with old paint, and the first note arrives shy and sweet. Mainstream fact, soft as breath. The oldest known flutes carved from bird bones and mammoth ivory date to more than 40,000 years ago in caves later named Hohlefels and Geisenklusterli, proof that people made melody when ice had opinions about everything. The tune tonight starts as a lullaby for babies and becomes a walking song for feet that will be busy in morning light. You wonder, as all decent skeptics do, whether that squeak is intentional. You decide yes because confidence is half of music. You carve stories small enough to wrap in a pouch. A figure broad hips, no face stress on belly and breast emerges from mammoth ivory in your hands, a token people in far valleys will someday nickname Venus. Historians still argue whether such carvings are fertility. Charm self-portraits glimpsed in shadow on stretched leather winter parka fashion plates, or something we don't yet have a brave enough word for. Whatever else they are handles for feelings too big to carry bare-handed. You rub a thumb across the smoothness and feel steadier, which is a good enough reason for art on nights when the wind invoices you for daring to live. Beads stitch distance into friendship. You trade a string of seashell beads someone's cousin hauled from a coast you've never tasted for a blade of glossy stone you know grew where mountains glare. The string becomes both jewelry and a portable business card. When you pass a cousin band at the ford, your shells wink that your people keep fair exchanges and decent jokes, which is all anyone really needs to know at first. Quirky eddy along the same stream, sometimes you find a pierced animal tooth that hums on a thread, not for beauty alone, but because it clacks softly at a run and early jogging playlist, reminding feet to keep the beat. The cave or the hide wall or the mammoth bone room has opinions about sound. You test the stone with humming, find the resonant belly of the chamber, and place animals where echoes lift them. You notice how your breath lamp flicker and drum agree to meet in that pocket of air. You adjust the story's speed so the echo finishes its thought before the next line begins. Mainstream whisper to pour into your ear, some painted chambers line up with acoustic sweet spots, as if the walls were chosen not only for their curves, but for their voices. Historians still argue whether this was engineering or happy accident recognized and kept. You conduct the chamber anyway because the room is part of the band. You keep memory outside your body too, where wolves can't gnaw it and sleep can't misplace it. A tally stick lies by the lamp, small notches tracking how many days the meat has hung, larger ones marking the moon's face, so you don't miss the run of fish that arrives when she looks a certain way. Another wand records who owes who, a mending favor, which is less about debt and more about comedy. 2 seams in a song is a very standard fee. Joke 3, you threaten to charge interest in smoked salmon. Nobody minds. A fringe rumor circles your camp every winter. A dreamer says that if you walk far enough into a cave, the rock itself tries to teach you things. Lines that draw themselves animals, that step out when the lamp nods, a thrum in your ribs that feels like the earth's own drum. You keep a respectful eyebrow raised. You also notice teenage footprints alongside torch smears, far from daylight, and think field trip. Historians still argue whether deep cave visits were shamanic rites, community theater, or both with a dash of dare. You bring extra wicks for both, and watch the kids' faces bloom at the first animal that looks like it might breathe. When the lamp gutters low, you press your palm against your handprint and feel the wall cooler than the night. The story has put coats on everybody's shoulders. The song has warmed the floorboards of your skull. You pack the paints, ochre puck, charcoal nub fat in a shell wrap the flute, nudge a coal into the ember mouse's nest, and tidy the brushes so tomorrow's hands find them smiling. Out beyond the door, the stars sketch their own untranslatable signs. In here, you've made signs you can read by touch. The Ice Age is still large and smug, but you have counterspells, pictures that teach songs that pace the heart, and a camp that agrees night after night to remember together. You notice the watchers at the edge of firelight have new eyes tonight, amber patient, rimmed in frost like tiny moons. They don't lick their chops or lunge. They wait. Behind them, The dump bone skin scraped thin a few fish heads. You tactically pretended to drop smells like a politely set table. The wolves choose your fire first, and then slowly you choose them back. It starts with distance measured in heartbeats. A low hand tosses a rib farther than a leap. A pair of ears swivels. Snow whispers under careful pause. Nothing bad happens. You practice the ancient art of not staring. You practice looking smaller than your hunger. And on a night so cold, the ember mouse blinks slow and red. One youngster beds down just outside the ring of lamplight, like a question that answers itself. Commensal becomes companion one ember at a time. At dawn, that bold youngster does a cautious circuit of the camp's perimeter nose, writing paragraphs the wind forgot. He learns the rhythm of your watch, who cracks ice at dawn, who sings before sleep. Which way the nursery's warmth leans, you learn his. 2. How his tail telegraphs fox, how his hackles cite lion, how his eyes say, I heard something you'll pretend not to hear for 10 more breaths. He discovers that people drop scraps more generously when he does not beg. You discover that footsteps sound different when he decides everything is fine. Joke 1, you start calling him the assistant camp manager because he schedules his own rounds and never fills out paperwork. Mainstream fact glows in the lamplight far to the west in a future museum case. Bones from a place your descendants will call Bon Oberkassel show a dog buried beside people more than 14,000 years ago, laid to rest like kin not vermin. Earlier, still odd canid skulls from sites like Goyet bear shorter snouts and broader brain cases than wild wolves, hinting that something had already begun to change between teeth and campfire. Historians still argue whether domestication sparked once or many times, whether those early skulls are true dogs or just unusually people-tolerant wolves, and whether the friendship traveled with bands across continents or bloomed in pockets wherever dumps fed courage. You shrug in the direction of the debate and pass another rib to the night. The day's work edits itself when a dog joins the roster. On a hunt, he ranges in a half moon ahead, nose surfing crosswind, drawing invisible lines around reindeer that your eyes only dream of. He stops hard at a scent gate, a place where prey always hesitate, and you learn to read that pause. A dart flies truer when it rides knowledge instead of hope. Afterward, his teeth help you recover the lost trail of a wounded animal before the cold can turn helpful and the competition can turn inconvenient. In thick snow, when tracks blur into rumor, he announces direction with a single decisive lean. You throw where he points, and your accuracy pretends it was always this good. Training is less a class and more a duet. You reward the behaviors that solve winter, the sit that keeps him from blundering into a snare, the stay that turns him into an early warning statue, the fetch that returns a dart with the loyalty of a friend who refuses to gossip. Crossing a blank white world, you tie a plaited cord from his collar to your belt. Each of you anchors the other's reality by tug. Quirky tidbit that makes bootmakers nod for long. Ice days you sew tiny paw booties from hair fur soft side and hair side out because frostbite doesn't interview for species. He tolerates the footwear like a stoic uncle at a wedding. Joke 2. You promise him their limited edition, which he accepts because the marketing department speaks fluent sausage. Roles diversify like tools. A broad-chested dog shadows Led Zeppelin and teaches it humility on inclines. Another, quick and wry, specializes in flushing hairs toward snares. A third sleeps by the nursery and practices the sacred art of being boring unless something isn't. Mainstream echo from far to the northeast. On a polar island your descendants will call Jokov, nearly 10,000 years ago, people used dogs for hauling and hunting and left gear that reads like a manual sled fittings harness, toggles dog bones shaped by pulling. Historians still argue whether hauling began deep in the Ice Age or flowered after the Great Thaw, but anyone who has dragged a loaded travois through crusted snow suspects the answer is as soon as somebody clever noticed dogs like to help. Something changes at the dump too. The ring of refuse shrinks because dogs are now the cleanup crew with tails. Your midden stops advertising to wolves with rougher manners and the camp smells less like invitation and more like occupied. Parasites ever entrepreneurial also notice the shift. You counter with old tools. A smoke bath of spruce needles bedding, changed more often than your pride likes an icy rinse that wakes feet and jokes, and the dogs learn. The lamps lessen quickly. Lie where smoke kisses lightly, and fleas reconsider their life choices. When a cold snap welds odor to everything, you rub a smudge of charcoal into fur where ice tends to cling. Physics approves the fashion. People talk to dogs differently than to each other. You pitch your voice low and warm. He tracks vowels more than consonants, intent more than grammar. You invent hand signs that look like dancing 2 fingers for eyes, an open palm for enough, a slow circle for home. And he becomes bilingual in camp speak and wind speak. The first time a child whistles and the dog wheels like a thrown spear, the entire camp's blood pressure drops. You did not invite Serenity to dinner, but it shows up wearing a tail. Later, when the dark feels loud, you hear the soft post of his claws, and remember that you no longer have to be the only creature listening to the night. Food politics stretch to include canines. They get bones no human molar wants skins to chew into future cordage, and a share that lines up with service. If meat is thin, dogs work harder and eat leaner. If luck is good, they shine like oiled stone. You learn not to overstuff a dog before a drive any more than you overheat yourself before a March temperature diplomacy, but for bellies. Centuries ahead, many dogs will carry extra copies of a starch-digesting gene and thrive on village scraps. Tonight, your friend votes for marrow with the enthusiasm of a poet finding adjectives. You keep caches honest by leaving a dog hair under the willow mat, a tiny reminder that the alarm system has a nose. Ritual makes room for them because ritual always expands to fit what the heart has chosen. A bead moves from your neck to a dog's collar, not for fashion, but so his soft jingle tells you where he is among sleeping bodies. A child sneaks a charm onto his harness and swears it keeps river ice polite. Elders do not contradict success. Mainstream tenderness you carry like a coal again and again across millennia. People bury dogs with care, sometimes with deer antler, sometimes with red ochre, sometimes curled as if still keeping watch. Historians still argue whether those burials honor work friendship spirit or all three braided. Your camp answers by scratching a favorite ear and passing the lamp a little closer. They are not tools. They are neighbors with their own calendars. The winter he ages, you adjust the chores, more nursery guard, less hair ballet. The spring she whelps, the camp rearranges, like furniture, quieter paths, warmer bedding, patient hands. Pups tumble through the syllabus, follow stop, come leave it good. You keep the bold but polite ones and send the biters and bolters back to wild fortunes. Selection is kind but firm because winter audits with a cold pencil. Over seasons, you notice soft changes, shorter faces, more rounded heads, tails that flag comfort as easily as alarm. Historians still argue whether such changes happen first in dumps, in hunts, or in hearts. Your answer is simply yes. Evenings broaden with their presence. Stories now have characters who smell the future. Songs pick up a new rhythm, the pad 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 between drum beats. Pictures gain a silhouette with a glorious tale beside the hunters at the river bend. You carve a toggling point, hang a tiny tooth from his collar, and check his booties before bed, the way you check your ember mouse. The lamp sighs. The wind tries to make an argument at the door and fails to get past the snore curled at your feet. Joke 3, you announce that the camp has upgraded to a 2-dog heating plan which earns unanimous approval from Toes. Of course, there are days he complicates the syllabus. He steals a fish head meant for the smoke rack and invents the fast chase me game. He barks at the moon because the moon looked at him funny. He rolls in something the wind would rather forget. You consider a stern speech. He considers a nap. You write a performance improvement plan on birch bark. He eats it, which resolves the paperwork beautifully. Tomorrow he will heal like he invented manners, and you will try not to smile too loudly about the treaty you both signed with your eyes. But in the ledger, The Ice Age keeps columns for warmth warning calories saved miles, made the numbers tilt in your favor with a dog beside you. He lends you a nose that sees what snow hides ears, that measure the night, a heart that believes the camp is his, and therefore worth warning into wakefulness. In return, you give him a fire that says, "Stay," a name you swear you don't say out loud, and a place in the story next to the ember mouse, the bone flute, the atlatl, and the lamp that turns fat into music. The partnership is simple math, written in paw prints and footprints that keep choosing the same path. When the dark tries to make you small, you feel the warm weight settle against your shins, the steady breath that says, "I've got this, watch." The stars burn, the lamp hums, your hand finds an ear that tips between wolf and something new. You scratch once, twice, and let the arithmetic of survival add up with a tail thump for punctuation. The ice is still large, your camp is still small. But we just got larger in a way the wind can't argue with no matter how loudly it talks at the door. You wake to a cough that has opinions, and an ankle that remembers yesterday's heroic turn too vividly. The camp's clinic opens without a sign, a flat stone for a table, a bundle of plants, hanging like green punctuation, a pot that thinks it's wise because it boils. The doctor is whoever's hands are calmest today. The copay is a polite song. You start with triage the way elders taught you warmth, water, worry, but in that order. The ember mouse blinks into tea a fistful of pine and spruce needles steeped until the air smells like a clean forest, shoved into a cup. Mainstream fact for your morning: those needles carry vitamin C, a quiet shield against the kind of slow winter that eats gums and energy. Your mouth tastes bright, and your mood agrees to participate. Pain gets negotiated, not ignored. You shave willow bark the color of old cream, boil it down, and sip the bitterness like a reasonable adult. The edge in your ankle backs off a step. Another mainstream whisper threaded through the steam willow's salicin is a cousin to a medicine your descendants will press into tidy tablets. You simply call it the tree that sighs at bruises. For a deep ache, someone rubs warmed bear fat into the ankle and wraps it with a spiral of soft bark. When it cools, the wrap firms like a promise. You lace a rawhide brace over it snug, not bossy, and practice temperature diplomacy with activity, which is to say, you don't sprint just to impress your pride. Joke 1. You announce you're offering the ankle a spade spruce scented, and your dog looks personally offended he wasn't invited. Wounds prefer tidy stories. A cut from a sloppy flake gets washed with melted snow that just met a rolling boil and a pinch of salt. You tamp dried sphagnum moss onto the edges green gold with antiseptic manners and lay a smear of spruce resin over a strip of hide to make a sticky seal that shrugs off slush. Quirky tidbit because field kits collect them, a dot of honey. When you can steal it from warmer moons, goes under the wrapping. Thick, unfriendly to certain little beasts and sweet enough to bribe courage. You do not lick it. Well, not much. Smoke helps too. You bend a lamplight cone of spruce over bedding clothing, even the dog's fur, to make fleas reconsider their lease. The shelter smells like a clean fireplace that just learned manners. Bones don't always respect choreography, so you learn the dance that convinces them. Splints come from smooth willow wands or rib slabs, padding from dry grass or hair, bindings from wet rawhide that shrinks to a trustworthy hug. You traction with a steady pull and a story in your voice because the camp has learned that muscles listen better when the mind is busy. Mainstream fact to slide into the cast. Skeletons from forager camps carry long-healed fractures and worn joints that tell of years lived past accidents. Proof that care is not a speech, but a schedule. You mark the splint with ochre lines so the patient knows how tight is tight enough because winter has no patience for guesswork. Teeth hold grudges, but you hold tools. You pick with a sliver of bone floss with sinew and rub an ache with a crumb of charcoal under the gum until the sting seems to have somewhere else to be. There's a story you like to repeat by firelight in far caves. A team scraped the plaque from ancient teeth and found traces of bitter poplar and friendly molds. which suggests your wide family has long experimented with bark that carries pain-easing chemistry and with growths that scold infections. Historians still argue whether that was self-medication accident or a shaman's prescription that wandered into dinner. Your mouth votes for the shaman and asks for another rinse. Ritual is not decoration here, it's architecture for nerves. Before setting a bone, you nod to the four winds. In practice, a slow turn to check drafts and steady your own hands. Before walking onto thin ice, you tap the surface 3 times with a staff and hum a small stubborn tune. The tapping finds hollows, and the tune keeps people from arguing with the results. A tiny pouch at your throat carries a bead, a sliver of antler, and a fleck of red ochre. You touch it when the sky looks like it forgot how to be sky. Mainstream iron-rich truth. Red ochre stains many burials from the deep past bodies, laid with care as if color itself helped the living make sense of leaving. Historians still argue whether ochre on the skin is for symbol for insect chewing for antiseptic help, or all 3 braided together. You rub a thumb over your pouch and accept all 3 as winter's favorite answer. The band has specialists, though. No one owns a hat that says so. A trance walker, the one who drums until the room's edges blur, sits with the feverish and sings heat into a calmer rhythm, then mixes tea from yarrow and meadowsweet and something bitter your tongue refuses to name. Is trance medicine? Is medicine trance? Historians still argue whether so-called shamans were a distinct role or just any person who could gather courage into sound. Your camp counts outcomes like calories. If the fever breaks, keep the drum handy. Joke 2. Someone asks for a prescription. The trance walker solemnly writes more soup on a piece of birch bark and immediately eats the paperwork. Risk gets managed like a household god, small daily offerings. You keep tallies on a stick snowfall days, wind from the northeast. A strange quiet among the hares. You set avalanche rules, no crossing slopes that lean like angry elbows after fresh dumpings. No hunting alone on days when the sky can't remember what it promised. On river ice, you read for silver in the white, the way light fails near springs. The button under your staff's tap bell for safe drum, for maybe hollow cough for turn back. The dog's ears count as instruments. If they tip forward and freeze, you freeze too. Quirky trick that earns its place, a hollow bone pressed to the ice, acts like a stethoscope for the river's secrets. You listen for fast water gossiping under a thin lid. Psychology doesn't know its name yet, but it lives here anyway. You pace grief with chores that demand hands and reward them scraping a hide until it shines, polishing a bone handle until it warms to skin, carving a tiny charm that looks nothing like the person you miss and somehow feels like them. You make a night of story where the one who's gone is the hero who always remembers where the ford is. Kids laugh at the right places, and the laugh does its work. You teach the camp a breathing trick, in for 4 steps, out for 4, so panic has to keep time and usually refuses. Joke 3, you dub it square breaths, which sounds official enough to work twice as well. Not every cure is lovely, and not every lovely thing cures. You try earth smoke codonopsis if you had a botanist, but you have an ant when bellies argue with winter stew. You warm a stone and press it to a stitch knit back so muscles can give up their letter of resignation. You quiet a child's cough by holding them in the doorway, where cold air shrinks swollen passages, while a lamp at heel keeps the rest of them honest. And sometimes you wait, which is the bravest medicine practicing watchfulness instead of drama. The camp audits itself at dusk. Snares checked, notched tallies. Updated ash, spread thin where slips might happen, ember mouse, bedded under a calm cap of gray. The trance walker taps the drum 3 times. Not magic, just protocol, and the watchers trade hand signs that say quiet stars all right. Historians still argue whether ritual gestures descended from religion or bubbled up from logistics when memory needed choreography. You stifle a smile. Around here, a lot of religion is just good habits told with style. By lamplight, you wrap the ankle one last time and not the rawhide with a loop you can undo when swelling changes its mind. You hang the spruce resin salve where the lamp can kiss it soft. Tilt the cup to the tea drinker's hands and lay the tally stick where morning eyes will see it. Your dog posts himself at the threshold and practices his specialty, being boring until necessary. The wind thinks about an argument at the door and decides to file it tomorrow. You stroke the bead pouch once, let the drum's last echo flatten into hush, and feel the night settle with the gentle weight that means you've made survival slightly less random. The Ice Age remains large and opinionated. Your camp remains small and methodical. Between those two truths, medicine and ritual hold the line like two steady palms. Your pantry isn't a single mammoth. It's a mosaic made of shimmering scales, whispering seeds, and jars of light disguised as fat. After the clinic's evening hush, you tie on your hood wave to the assistant camp manager, who pretends not to care and walk to the river where winter keeps secrets under a glass lid. The ice hums low a tune practiced all season. You answer with a staff tap 3 beats that check the safety and tell the water you come to bargain. If big game is a thunderclap, fish are a steady drum, small, dependable, full of oil that remembers summer, even when your breath looks like it's wearing a scarf. Joke 1 you call the setup Ice Age Sushi Bar, then immediately correct yourself to Ice Age Cooked Very Thoroughly Bar, because your stomach appreciates promises it can verify. You and a partner chisel 2 holes, one upstream, one down, and feed a cord beneath the ice using a willow swimmer, a bowed stick that rides the current like a polite otter. When the cord appears at the second hole, you pull through a net you wove from nettle fiber and sinew weights along the bottom, a shy row of floats along the top made from bark and puffed bladder. You sprinkle snow to dull the shine, then thrum the surface with a handful of reeds to startle fish into motion. Underneath the net breathes. You feel it through the line like a shy handshake. Mainstream fact for your mitten pocket by the late Ice Age barbed harpoons, and in some regions fish hooks and nets, leave their signatures in bone and stone evidence that people leaned hard into rivers and coasts when the big herds grew coy. Historians still argue whether under ice netting like this flourished widely or clustered where currents and craft aligned, but your camp votes with dinners that don't argue back. When the net rises, the bank becomes a small factory with excellent views. You stone boil a pot until it whispers, then dip fish in and out to set the flesh before hanging them on a rack over friendly smoke. Thin air and cold pull water out like polite thieves. Smoke scolds bugs, even in the seasons when they form committees. You slice some fillets paper thin and lace them near the lamp for speed-drying footbag snack sled driver morale bribe for teenagers asked to gather willow in wind. Quirky tidbit that makes bootmakers grin. You save the tougher skins to stitch into waterproof overmittens for wet snow days. Hair side out turns slop scales, side out turns splash. And your dog accepts a fish skin boot trial with the dignity of a saint who has seen things. Rivers aren't the only aisles in your grocery. You carry a knotted cord and a flat stone with shallow cups, the camp's nutting board, and walk to the hazel thickets you mapped in your path. Palace. The ground flashes with shells split by beak and frost. You add your own neat halves to the story roasting baskets of nuts in a low ember bed until they sigh and surrender. The smell alone is a treaty. Seeds get their turn too. You strip heads from grasses and sedges into a hide, toss them on a breezy slope, and let chaff chase the wind while weightier news falls back into the bag. Back at camp, a handstone meets a flat slab. You crush just enough to bake hot stones with seed meal and marrow glaze into travel cakes, less ancestral meat. Brick more winter granola with managerial ambitions. Historians still argue whether routine seed grinding was common during the coldest spells or swelled with the post-ice warming. Your wrists don't wait for the verdict, they turn circles until dinner happens. Not all seeds arrive ready to be friends. Acorns flinch with tannins that crumple tongues. Your fix is patience married to water crack leach in baskets under slow current or in snowmelt, changed again and again, then roast until the bitterness resigns. Cattail gives you 3 groceries for the trouble of 1 walk: rhizomes that roast into starch ropes, spring shoots that crunch like hopeful celery, and golden pollen in warm moons that turns into pancake dust you swear by, even if pancakes haven't been invented yet. Quirky but useful cattail fluff doubles as tinder and pillow stuffing, which means breakfast sneaks into your bedding and nobody complains. Joke 2. When you toss seed in the breeze and call it winnowing, you also call it delegating to the wind, which makes you feel very managerial for someone in a fur hood. Fat is winter's lamp and lunchbox. You simmer trimmed scraps until clear drips collect like beads. You crack long bones with a wooden maul on a polite stone and scoop out marrow that gleams like sun kept in a tube. When you render bone fragments with stone-boiled water, the top layer sets into tallow. You can cut and stack like tidy snow bricks. Mainstream signal from the archaeological chorus, fractured long bones and grease processing debris litter many Pleistocene camp floors, markers that marrow and rendered fat underwrote survival as much as flashy hunts did. You fold that fat into dried meat and crushed berries, press it into the stomach bag you cleaned earlier, stitch it shut with sinew, and feel very clever about a food that travels, resists rot, and tastes like perseverance. The cold itself becomes a sous chef. You build snow pantries, pits lined with willow and bark on the shadow side of a drift, tamped tight so fox noses mutter and move on. In deep freeze, you freeze dry, by accident and by design setting. Racks where wind licks water away and leaves light meat that rehydrates fast in the pot. You open caches at dawn or dusk when ravens are off doing raven things, and you rehide your grocery with a private signature, 3 willow pegs and an ochre dot to keep future you from arguing with future water. Historians still argue whether some of the mysterious pits at late glacial sites are storage ritual or both. Your stomach casts a decisive vote for storage, with ritual welcome to help dig. Fermentation taps another set of shadows. You line a small pit with stones and spruce boughs, layer fish with moss, weigh it, and leave it under cold soil where microbes do slow math. The lamp respects. A few days to weeks later, depending on temperature and bravery, you open a smell with opinions and a flavor that makes oil sing in your veins. You eat it in small bright bites with frozen berries and laugh at your own face the first time. Then you miss it when it's gone. You also plant berries in bags of snow and let the cold concentrate them. Come lamplight, you have jam without a jar. Quirky tip the elders insist on: designate a downwind corner for experiments the first night for the happiness of friends and dogs. Joke 3, you call fermented fish surprise soup starter, and nobody argues once the pot agrees. Spring thaws, edit your methods. When the river remembers how to be river, you stack low weirs of brush in side channels so fish pause where your hands wait. You bait tiny bone hooks with a sliver and let the line wear a bell made from a hollowed bone chip. It ticks against the ice edge when your dinner writes its name. Mainstream aside, fish weirs and traps appear across post-glacial landscapes. But even in colder spans, opportunistic blocking and under-ice lines likely turned days into meals. Water is generous to those who think like current. Historians still argue whether big weirs mark settled months or just busy weeks in a mobile round. You keep both options on your calendar, which is also your arm and your memory. Children learn this small food syllabus with mittened hands. They measure seeds by songs, 1 verse to gather 1 to winnow, and count fish by the drum beats it takes to set the rack. Sharing rules bend gently to fit the scale. A gatherer keeps a pinch for pockets and pours the rest into the common bowl. The first fish goes to whoever woke first to crack ice, which somehow rotates in a pattern only grandparents can explain. Your dog noses the racks, is politely shooed, and gets promoted to crumb inspector, a post he takes very seriously when crumbs exist, and nobly when they do not. On nights when the lamp sulks and the wind rehearses insults at the door, the smell of seed cakes toasting on a stone and a pot whispering of fish and berries settles the room's shoulders. You grease a strip of dried meat with tallow until it shines like a little road. You pass a roasted nut to the elder whose hands hold winter's map. You sneak a berry to the child who turned your winnowing into a dance with the wind. The big hunts still matter, but you feel the richer spell, 1,000 small clevernesses braided into quiet abundance that doesn't need to brag. The Ice Age remains stern. You remain inventive. Your pantry remains plural. And when you tuck the ember mouse for the night, your breath tastes faintly of smoke and seed and oil, a flavor the body translates as we will be all right. Tracks overlap in the morning, like two stories told at once. Yours straight, efficient, a little smug since Sled Zeppelin finally stopped squeaking. Theirs wider toes, deeper ball. A pause at each rise, as if the land is a book and they're savoring commas. Your assistant camp manager lifts his head, gives one considered huff, and decides the news is not lion. You taste the air smoke, fat birch, a whisper of resin that isn't yours. You ease a palm open, tuck the other over the dart so it's visible but not loud, and step into a clearing where strangers stand with the same careful posture you're wearing. We are very calm, and also, please do not be weird. Joke 1, you practice your best. I come in peace face, which unfortunately looks a lot like I smelled a ferret. They are close enough to feel familiar, and far enough to make your bones pay attention. Bodies made for cold barrel-chested forearms that look like they can out-argue a tree. Faces set a little forward, like they expect the wind to try something. The elders of your band have a word for them that translates as cousins with heavy stories. You've heard of them at the Nut Place and the Obsidian Bend. You've seen their camp from a distance. Low fire thick hides a ring of bones, stacked with the calm logic of people who keep their weather indoors. Mainstream fact lands on the snow with you, long before the last of these winters. Your kind meets and mixes with Neanderthals. Later in mountains far east, cousins add Denisovan chapters too. Bits of those meetings ride in future bodies, 1 to 2 hands in 100 of your genes from Neanderthals, for many outside Africa. More from Denisovans in some island and mountain peoples, small lasting signatures of evenings like this. Eyes track hands before they track mouths. You show the universal verbs, palms outward stay. Fingers touching chest me, a slow circle at belly food. They answer with shapes that rhyme with yours. A parcel changes owners without drama. You offer a string of shells from a coast your feet have never met. They pass you a blade of stone so glossy, the lamp will want to admire itself. The stone's source lives far from here. Your path palace builds a new room around its shine. You pour a little marrow into a cup of bark, set it between you. They break strips of meat, lay them beside it, and nod. Eating together is older than grammar. Your dog, who believes in diplomacy and fat, stares at the bowl with radiantly ethical self-control. You award him 10 invisible points. Every meeting stacks small knowledge. Your cousins show a glue trick you didn't know, a birch tar tempered with mysterious black crumbs that keeps its bite in deep cold. You trade back a toggling point pattern that helps a harpoon head sit easy in fish skin, and then disagree with it at the right moment. A woman with shoulders like Truthworks takes your bone flute squints and coaxed from it a scale you don't play at home. Her camp knows intervals your walls haven't learned. You answer with a drum pattern that makes their feet draw a line in snow, the shared map of rhythm. Historians still argue whether the symbolic explosions near the end of the Ice Age grew separately in different peoples, or echoed as gifts borrowed and adapted. Your evening says both can be true without getting jealous. Words try to climb out of your mouths and sometimes slip. You lean into pantomime and the grammar of shoulders. Jokes translate someone mimes, Sled Zeppelin hitting a bump, and everyone winces by instinct. Names don't, not yet. You trade nicknames by gesture. Their best napper becomes Antler Hand, your sentry, who hears Snowthink becomes Quiet Ear. Quirky Tidbit warms the paws you notice cut marks on raven wing bones hanging from one of their belts. Feathers pulled for adornment, maybe for ceremony. Far away and long ago, and all over, cousins seem to have a softness for birdshine, collecting talons and feathers like punctuation for bodies. You tuck the idea away with your beads. Night folds closer, and something softer than barter arrives. A niece from your camp and a hunter from theirs end up sharing a story with hands about lightning striking a far ridge. Their laughter finds a shared tempo and refuses to stop. The elders do the elder glance 3 seconds long, 1 lifetime deep, and then they inventory practicalities. Winter caches, travel loops, who owes who a mending favor, how to avoid turning the same herd into an argument. Mainstream wonder you'll tell by lamplight. In a cave your descendants name Denisova. Someone will find a small bone from a girl whose mother was Neanderthal, and Father Denisovan, a first-generation child history, thought it would only guess at. Since evenings like this exist, no wonder bones with braided stories do too. Historians still argue whether such joinings were ordinary neighborliness, rare and ritual, or everything in between, depending on valley and weather. You decide the answer is the same as with shelters. Use what keeps you warm and kind. Of course, not every meeting stays sweet. Some end with raised voices, a line dug in snow flags, lowered from a drive lane because 2 bands planned 1 corridor. You've heard stories of spears used as punctuation and of camps moving early to avoid remembering where anger sleeps. You remember, too, how many winters are saved by a gift of fat or a loan of cord. Prestige travels with generosity more than with hoarding, even across kin boundaries. Grudges are expensive in a currency everyone needs. Joke 2. You suggest a committee. The world's largest eye roll happens in stereo, and just like that, the tension melts 2 degrees. Your cousin's shelter invites, like a question low, thick, almost smug in a wind that stops to read it. Inside their hearth is long and narrow stones, banked to hold both heat and stories. The walls are stitched with fur so dense, the lamp sighs in relief. You recognize the architecture. The same cold sinks the same polite vents, but the placement of amulets, the way tools sleep near the door. The habit of setting a spare shoe by the entry like a welcome charm, those are theirs. They carve with a cut along the edge you don't use. They spiral their sinew left where you go right. They call your charcoal eye stripe cloud whisker and claim it improves aim on glare days. You will be trying cloud whisker tomorrow. Rumors from elsewhere wander into the firelight. Someone mentions a valley to the south where people paint animals with dots above their backs that might be stars, or might be seeds, or might be how their shoulders feel in spring melt. Someone mentions cousins farther east who wear bracelets of polished stone so green it looks like thaw. You lay a hand on your bead pouch and think about roots, obsidian trails, shell ropes. The possible highways of a world big enough to require songs to fold it. Mainstream echo hums under the gossip ornaments, and raw materials travel far in this age, suggesting webs of contact wide as a winter's patience. Some lines carry goods, others carry ideas, a few carry both wrapped around a marriage knot. Historians still argue whether certain hybrid tool traditions, the ones that look like one camp, borrowing the other's tricks, are the fruit of contact or the flowers of coincidence. Your fingers say, "We learned this stitch from them," and your pride, if it's honest, agrees. Before parting, you exchange signs that mean we were here without trouble, and let's keep it that way. 3 stones in a line under a willow bend a shaved branch at shoulder height. On the lee side, a thin ochre arc on a pale boulder. Trail letters for future feet that spell peace passed through at dawn. Food moves again, ribs for cords, fat for flint, gossip for company. The younger ones invent a contest of who can track whose tracks and stumble home. Faces sore from doing laughter in 2 languages. Joke 3, you threaten to file a crossband report with the Department of Temperature Diplomacy. Your dog eats the birch bark form, which history will later describe as compliance. When you walk back, the stars look less like bosses and more like witnesses. The assistant camp manager prances ahead, then falls in at heel tail announcing that all cultures, regardless of skull shape, approve of marrow. You bank the ember mouse and feel a new hallway open in your path. Palace the corridor labeled exchanges. In it, a blade that wasn't yours until it was a glue trick, with a smell you'll recognize forever, a song that slides on a different note, a laugh that will echo for weeks, and the knowledge that your family is larger than your fire ring. Later, leaning on a warm stone, you let the day settle into something you can sleep inside. The Ice Age remains stern and enormous, but tonight, you felt the world soften at its seams. Cousins met traded weather traded tools, and from time to time, traded tomorrows. Historians still argue whether language fully bridged the gap, or whether gestures did most of the heavy lifting. Your hands still smelling faintly of resin and shared food. Sign a simple answer you trust. We pointed, we tasted, we listened, we tried, we stayed. And your breath fogging for a second in the lamplight looks just like agreement. You spend a morning turning miles into favors. The wind is honest, the river is in a good mood, and sled Zeppelin rolls behind you with a dignified hush that says today is for visiting. Gifts ride the runners like small suns, a coil of sinew cord waxed with tallow so it won't snarl a fist-sized lump of birch tar wrapped in bark. 2 nets of dried fish heavy with memory, a pouch of ochre that glows as if it still remembers noon. Your assistant camp manager trots ahead wearing his diplomatic collar bead. He's very committed to foreign policy where snacks are involved. You're not just being nice, you're adjusting the weather of the social world so winter doesn't feel so large. Joke 1, you call this errand logistics and vibes, which is half a joke and half the curriculum. The land itself draws the route in shiny lines. A tongue of black glass obsidian gleams from a cousin camp to the west, and you've learned the path by heart. River Ridge Willow Bend that smells like bees in warm moons. Then the basalt shoulder where great-grandparents found the first chunk and argued over whose eyes were best. Mainstream anchor to slip under your belt across the late Ice Age. People moved prized raw materials a very long way. High-quality flint chert, and where the land offered it, obsidian, sometimes tens to hundreds of miles often, by down-the-line exchange, where each camp passed a little along. You feel that chain in your hands when you turn a glossy blade in the lamp. It's a map you can cut with. Ornament travels even farther than edges. A string of small pale shells touches your throat, sea things traded step by friendly step until they reached a river that never tasted salt. You carry extra strands for gifts because nothing says we plan to see each other again, like beads that hum of elsewhere. In warmer lands and older stories, you've heard of ostrich eggshell beads crossing whole valleys in Africa, tiny circles that threaded far-flung families together. Your own beads are river shells, but they hold the same idea, a portable handshake. You tie a bracelet on a child in the next camp, and their grin feels like weather improving. Trade is not a market with shouts. It's a conversation that has been going on so long, the pauses are as important as the words. You arrive at the obsidian bend and set your offerings on a flat stone in a polite order fat. Because fat is always the right first sentence chord, because ties are literal fish, because generosity should be delicious glue, because alliances stick color, because beauty travels fastest. Their return gifts answer, in a grammar you recognize, a core of that black glass. 2 bladelets, like slivers of night. A cache of finely scraped hides. Your fingers can't stop admiring a toggle that will make your harpoon head behave like it went to finishing school. No scales, no weights, just memories. Last autumn's soup when the river stuttered, the time your cousin pulled their uncle from under ice, the song you brought them about. Clouds that smell like snow. Between gifts, people trade instructions. A napper with wrists like water shows you how to tease longer blades from a core by lowering the platform angle and believing in your follow-through. You show him your new pitch temper, the charcoal and wax recipe that forgives clumsy cold hands. They pass around a bone needle so thin it blushes in the lamp, and a woman gently points where your stitches wander. When you're tired, your hood thanks her in advance. You watch how they grease runners, fish skin burnish, for low crunchy snow, dry tallow for sastrugi, and how they lash the harness so shoulders carry load instead of throats. Historians still argue whether techniques like these spread mostly with people moving with ideas, migrating by talk, or with neighbors borrowing by watching in long, quiet evenings. Your camp bets on yes in different proportions, depending on whether the cousin's soup is good. Not all gifts are objects. There's hospitality, which tastes like hot fat on a cold morning. There's safe passage, which feels like not being stared at too hard across a drive lane. There's information, which is the finest food once your belly is full. You trade weather. The ice coughed under Willow Bend wolves denning on the sun side of limestone teeth and roots open. Water past the Third Bluff Drift collapsed across the North Notch. Someone tells a story of Green Rock, 2 valleys south that polishes to the color of thaw. Someone else sings the path to a spruce stand that drops cones late. These are gifts with long handles. You tuck them into your path palace and label the shelves. You also trade time. A cousin's travois lashed with damp rawhide has gone troublesome. You relash and sit by their fire until the thong shrinks and grips. In return, they mend the tear in your best sleeping hide while telling the story with hands about the bear who mocked their tent, which is way funnier now that the tent is not being mocked. This is delayed reciprocity, but no one calls it that. It's just the long game where kindness compounds like interest, and winter is the auditor. Joke 2. You make an extremely official note on a shard of bark, owed 1 laugh at next thaw, and your dog eats it because that's his filing system. Objects carry stories that stick in throttles across continents. A cousin holds up a little ivory carving whose curves remind you of figures you've never seen in your own camp. The broad-hipped style you once traded for and wrapped in your pouch for comfort. Are these Venus forms a fashion that rode trails? A shared idea that bubbled up wherever winter made bellies important? Or both historians still argue whether the spread of those figurines marks tight-knit networks of people or simply minds that rhyme when the same cold asks the same questions. You don't mind the uncertainty. You trace the carving's almost smoothness with your thumb and feel steadier, which is enough outcome for tonight. You hear of caches along the trail blades, stored under flat stones at neutral fords, packets of fat sealed in stomach skin and buried in snow pits a day from anyone's camp. Are they insurance against storm's gifts, left for cousins you haven't met, or offerings to the kind of luck that listens? Historians still argue whether isolated piles of fine blades and cores are stashes for later pickup ritual killings of tools, or the archaeology of a plan that got interrupted by weather. You test a middle path. This season you leave 1 small package under a shaved willow, marked with an ochre dot, and decide to accept any outcome friend future you, or fox with exquisite taste. Quirky rumor, you half love, half roll your eyes at some bands, not a special friend cord, a braided grass ribbon with a signature twist that you give when alliances feel new but sturdy. The rule is to untie 1 knot whenever you share food or shelter with that band, and when the cord runs smooth, you owe each other a visit with gifts, laughter, and a very large pot. Will archaeologists ever find these? Probably not. Grass has opinions about durability, but the idea that promises can be counted softly and remembered by hand fits the rest of your winter. The assistant camp manager develops his own trade protocol. He sits exactly 1 tail length from the fat, looks away with heroic restraint, and accepts his tiny share only when offered to the left for reasons known only to him. The cousins praise his manners. You pretend you trained him on purpose. He and their dogs do the fast sniff math of who you, where you, what you, then collapse into a pile that says the treaty is ratified. Diplomatic relations improve by tail thumps. Sometimes the gifts get ambitious. An elder proposes a spring meet on the gravel bar with the good echo, a little fair with small fires, set a spear's throw apart, where stories don't step on each other, and kids race in the shallows while adults pretend not to keep score. Shells change necks, stones change pockets, songs change keys halfway through, because someone laughs too hard. You picture the scene, bone flutes squeaking their first note like doors with opinions drums, borrowing the river's meter smoke, painting the air in flavors. Your ember mouse will travel in a place of honor for that day, and you will grease Sled Zeppelin like it's auditioning. All of this Edges Ornaments news visits is a way of stretching warmth across miles. When a lean season takes a bite out of your pantry, you walk with a gift and come back with a story and a bag heavier by exactly enough. When your cousin's river coughs up its ice too late, they show up with seed cakes and a joke about your dog's complicated filing system. The ledger never squares in 1 week, and that's the point. You're investing in later in someone else's dawn. Mainstream whisper from your inner anthropologist's social networks are insurance against bad luck, and artifacts that wander are receipts written in stone shell and fat. As you turn home, the gifts you carry weigh sweet, not as burden, but as future. Bladelets whisper inside their moss like secrets that will become careful cuts. The hide-wrapped lump of black glass feels cool and patient, a promise you'll keep your edges kind. A new song rattles in your jaw, changed by another camp's scale. You try it under your breath, and it fits your feet at exactly the pace winter likes. Joke 3, you vow to write a grant for further research into the relationship between snacks and peace. Then you remember you can just bring more snacks. By the time the smoke from your own shelter writes its hello in the pale sky, you've added a corridor to your path palace labeled Distant Places. In it, hang a shell that smells softly of a sea. You've never seen a blade that remembers a mountain you've never climbed, and a story that knows people you haven't met yet. The Ice Age still sprawls huge and a little smug, but the road between fires gleams with traffic of gifts, of news of promises knotted loosely so they can be untied at the right table. You bank the ember mouse smooth, the cachet lids scratch the diplomat, and sleep, feeling richer in a currency that doesn't jingle, but absolutely buys tomorrow. The weather changes its mind before breakfast. The night was a hard glass-lidded thing. The morning walks in wearing a wet smile. Snow slumps. The roof drips in a polite staccato. Your dog pads outside, sniffs the air like it's soup, and gives you the look that says, "Today the world is made of puddles." You repost your vents, lift the door hide so it doesn't freeze into a comma, and shift the meat rack higher, because meltwater is a hungry thief. The wind slides around to the south and arrives warm enough to make you suspicious Chinook or Feihin a breath that could be gift or trick. Joke 1, you inform the camp you're temporarily promoting yourself to Deputy of Unpredictable Weather Department of Temperature Diplomacy. The committee one dog approves. Across years, this morning is not unique. The Ice Age is famous for cold, but it is also an artist of sudden edits. Thaws that behave like rumors, snows that behave like arguments, wines that move whole dunes the way a hand moves grain on a hide. Mainstream. Fact that sits down beside the lamp cores of ancient ice pulled from far north sheets record abrupt climate jumps temperatures stepping several degrees within decades, sometimes faster events later. Scholars will nickname with tidy labels and stern graphs. Near the end of this long winter, a deep chill called the Younger Dryas will arrive like a door slamming around what your future will count as 12,900 to 11,700 years ago, then leave with equal drama. You don't know its name. You know the feeling of a sky that forgets its place. You have counterspells. You're round the loop of camps and seasons flexes. Thaw comes early. You move fast to fish the first cracks in river ice because the Ice Age, cooked very thoroughly bar opens before predators get the memo. A late hard snap. You lengthen the smoke on racks and lean on caches that wear willow caps and private ochre dots. Fat becomes a vote you cast for tomorrow. Tools are modular, so Kit can pivot Atla teal darts for bison when the steppe stays open, barbed bone for river, when the willows blink green too soon. You keep 2 ways to make fire, 3 spare cords, and 5 jokes that keep hands steady when plans get edited mid-sentence. The land leaves notes if you learn its handwriting. You watch how hoarfrost, writes along willow twigs, heavy and long, when a calm cold is thinking of staying feathery and brief, when warmth is sneaking back. You read snow surface the way a tracker reads hoof sastrugi, sharpening under a mean wind. Sun crust forming a treacherous sheen that will carry you at dawn and swallow you at noon. Quirky tidbit that earns its place on the warm at 0 days. Tiny snow fleas' springtails pepper the surface like spilled charcoal, hopping with a cheerfully unhelpful optimism that says thaw's flirting, which is useful if you don't take it personally. Your charcoal cloud whisker eye stripe learns a new job glare control when the world becomes a mirror at speed. Elders keep a library of bad years. The winter of speaking smoke when vents lied. The spring of thin ice and thick pride when 3 cousins fell through and came back cold, embarrassed alive. You rehearse their verses the way you practice atletl form, so the body knows what to do before the mind finishes blinking. You add marginalia as the climate improvises a new crack where the river used to stay polite. A hill slope that started slipping after a thaw sat too long in its lap. Historians still argue whether oral tales encode real climate jolts, ice edges racing rivers, reversing moods, or whether we just paste weather onto good stories after the fact. Either way, your songs get boots to the right ford on a day that looks like a mistake. Animals vote early. Reindeer detour to higher wind-lashed knobs where crust breaks sooner. Bison nose for sedge and thawed seeps while the main plain still sulks. Later, as the great cold loosens its fist, red deer and boar begin peeking from the fringe of trees, and you pencil more forest tricks into the syllabus. Quiet feet shorter throws snares that bark can't argue with. The assistant camp manager edits his patrols in crust. He ranges wide and lets sound carry. In slop, he hugs the terraces where footing is honest. You pay attention to coats, not calendars fox turning patchy, ahead of melt hairs wearing last week's white. In this week's brown, and you keep your kit ready to hunt embarrassment as needed. Joke 2. You start calling those months fashion season, which the hares do not appreciate. Water writes in capital letters during change. Ice jam floods can turn a friendly bend into a loud, wet surprise. You don't camp below a terrace that boasts driftwood eyebrows. You trust the hollow bone stethoscope to whisper the river's private plans under ice. In thaw, you trust a long pole and an even longer dose of patience. On the coast, if your round touches that long edge, sea ice loosens its grammar. Seal openings move. A misread tide pulls too hard. The ember mouse gets a special travel seat, because on slop days, even fire wants a seatbelt. You grease sled zeppelin fish skin if the snow is wet tallow, if it's a sandpaper day, and run lines that keep loads from sulking into mush. Flexibility is comfort disguised as caution. Foodways bend, but don't break. When thaws smear schedules, you widen the menu tubers, dug from south-facing slopes where the sun hoards warmth. Willow catkins, new and shy. Late berries buried under snow that preserve them like tiny jars. Fish kept in under-ice pens, you feed like you would very boring pets. You leach acorns longer when water runs cold and slow. Tilt drying racks to catch that 2-day window when wind remembers how to be knife instead of towel, and refresh caches with extra grass matting, because melt likes to gossip down the seams. Mainstream chorus from camp floors far away. People who rode out this era most gracefully made diet mosaics big game when it came, small steady foods when it didn't. So the climate's mood swings couldn't knock all the bowls off the shelf at once. The kit evolves under your fingers as the world tips. In open windy years, you love a long, narrow dart with a stubborn spine. When brush thickens, you cut shafts shorter and favor points that forgive ribs of alder and birch. You experiment with lighter toggles that flip clean in trout skin, then go bigger when the river swells fat. Fire drill spindles change species. Cord recipes swap nettle for linden when one valley sours. Historians still argue whether bursts of new tool styles near the Great Thaw reflect fresh migrations, local innovation, or old neighbors suddenly seeing each other more as roots open. Your hands report the truth. Your palms can feel. Adaptation is not a speech, it's a workshop. There's a louder debate you can't help overhearing carried by winds that have never heard of journals. When herds grow thin as the ice retires, and forests take ground, when mammoths walk the horizon less often, and bison trails smudge into thickets, you feel the big question under the smaller chores. Historians still argue whether the great animal disappearances owe more to climate-squeezing habitats, or to hunters like you sharpening edges and plans, or to both braiding into a rope that pulled too tight. Your camp can't resolve the argument. It can resolve to treat every life taken like a bargain, signed in calm ink, to waste nothing and brag less, to stock the pantry with many kinds of small certainty. Risk maps change, so the social map changes with them. You plan more meets gravel bar fairs, where news arrives faster than meltwater, where a cousin from the trees gifts you a snare trick, and you trade back a fish weir layout that forgives clumsy days. The friend chord, if you're the kind to not such things, loses loops faster as winter acts like an indecisive guest. Obligations become warmth you can eat. Distant places feel closer when storms pretend to be roads. You travel with beads and fat and leave with a story about a valley where frogs sang so loud at first, thaw you forgot your own line. The body learns a pacing that belongs to change. You practice the quiet art of not committing too early a camp set. Light, a shelter that can decide in 2 hours to be a windbreak here or a roof there. A meat rack that unhooks to become a travois crossbar. You nap when the weather allows, because a midnight freeze might require a moonlit migration across safe crust. You eat before you're hungry, because the river will demand your best patience at the worst minute. Joke 3, you tell the teens the rule is hydrate before the ice remembers its water, which is dorky enough to stick in their heads and therefore useful. Tonight, the warm wind gives up its bluff, and the sky pulls the temperature rug again. You hear the crack as puddles grow armor. You smell air that has lost the round edges of thaw. You step out, and the world rings a thin, clean note the ice knows by heart. You check the door, hide down the vent, penciled open the ember mouse fed the tally stick 2 notches for mind the river. You remind your bones the trick isn't guessing right. It's preparing kindly. The ice age is still large and moody. Your answer is still small and stubborn. A modular kit, a flexible calendar, a pantry. That's a quilt neighbors who recognize your laugh in a whiteout, and a camp willing to edit plans with grace. The wind agrees to argue tomorrow. You accept with a shrug and an extra cord in your pocket. The world exhales, and you feel it in your lungs first. Winter's jaw unclenches by inches, then miles. Rivers shoulder their ice and remember how to talk in complete sentences. Where the glacier once pressed, its cold thumb kettles become lakes that blink awake, and the old wind, our relentless teacher, loses a little of its homework grading attitude. You walk into this warming world with the same pack of habits you honed under the stern gaze of ice temperature diplomacy. Pockets of fat and ember mouse with good manners, and a map stored in your feet. Joke 1, you congratulate the sun on its promising return to full-time hours, and it replies by leaking through your vent at dawn like it owns the place. Trees advance like a quiet army. Shrubs become thickets, thickets become edges, edges grow trunks, shadows secret places. On the open steppe, you once read herds from horizon to horizon. Now you read dapple and silence, the new grammar of deer, learning to ghost between trunks. Your kit edits itself with the weather dart slimmer for close lanes. Heads that forgive alder ribs, lines and hooks kept always ready because water has decided to be generous most months. Mainstream turn of the great page, around 11,700 years ago. Give or take a handful of winters. The Younger Dryas chill ends abruptly, and the Holocene settles in sea levels, rise far and fast compared with a lifetime, and coastlines redraw themselves as if a child got hold of the world's charcoal. The Bering Land bridge that stitched continents blinks underwater. Shelves where camps once smoked fish grow kelp and keep their stories quiet. Historians still argue whether those drowned coasts hid whole highways of early people whose camps the sea now keeps. You walk beaches that used to be hills and hum a verse for the maps you can't touch anymore. Big animals fade from your daily nouns. Mammoths stop shouldering the horizon. Giant bison become a story your uncle tells well. Even the lion's punctuation gets rare. You switch from thunderclaps to drum beats with more ease than your pride expected. Steady fish, small deer rabbit routes that you now trace by the way saplings bend toward light. Quirky tidbit with a future wink, middens of cracked shells. Those shimmering heaps beside brackish coves turn into landmarks that outlive memory, as if meals were voting for where stories should be told. You keep trading distance for options baskets, for seasons, hooks for moods, seed cakes for the evenings when the rain forgets to stop. Historians still argue whether people like you tipped the balance on the great beasts, or whether climate narrowed the stage until they had nowhere left to stand, or whether both ropes pulled together. You answer with careful cuts, generous shares, and fewer boasts. Neighbors change, and your sentences with them. Cousins from the tree fringe bring snares that whisper rather than shout. You pass them. The bow song One Valley teaches you a string that hums a short, quick arrow that likes close alleys. Yes, the atlatl keeps its desk. Yes, the bow steals some shifts. Along warmer rivers, others arrive with sickles whose teeth wear a gloss from cutting wild grains. The lamplight gleams back, and you feel the future press a palm to the small of your back. Mainstream breadcrumb to place on the trail in the Levant. People later called Natufians begin to settle in snug villages before grains wear leashes, storing seeds, mortaring meals, and weaving baskets that predate clay pots. Hearths with longer memories. Historians still argue whether tending patches and encouraging favorite plants counts as gardening, or just very persuasive gathering. Your hands, sticky with husk and patience, suggest the words, "Don't change the work." Your round flexes. The winter basin still calls, but spring now includes a backwater that holds fish, like a moth holds light. Summer adds berries in upland shade, nuts under fledgling oaks, tubers in south slopes where soil keeps secrets from frost. Autumn glosses your knives in seed dust as often as in blood. You rearrange the song so toddlers can run its new verses without tripping. You repaint the wall rivers a little wider. Tree lines a little bolder reindeer, drifted farther north like. Commas shifted up a line. Your assistant camp manager adapts in 5 minutes flat, discovering that deer paths taste like news and that 2-dog heating plan becomes 2-dog shade plan at noon. Joke 2. He drafts a paw memo requesting seasonally appropriate booties, then eats it for legal reasons. Tools and cords inherit the climate's mood. Birch timer still sticks. Sinew still holds. But now you carry a basket that breathes rather than a sack that sweats, and your pitch gets a little more beeswax when summer asks for forgiveness. You carve toggling heads that like salmon skin. You stitch fish skin mitts for slop, then tuck them away when heat says, "Not today." You keep the bone flute because the world is still large, and sometimes your throat needs its friend. The lamp learns to be smaller, more often, but it never retires. The night still expects a little sun indoors. Rituals tilt, but don't topple. You still lay a palm on the wall, but the dots march differently. A new visual grammar born of forest and edge. You still tie friend cords, but you untie their knots faster because the road between camps now goes through shade that eats footsteps, and arrivals should not surprise anyone holding a baby. You still bury with ochre when the long sleep comes, but sometimes you build a cairn above a lake that used to be a valley, and your grief learns to float a little. Historians still argue whether the artistic bursts in caves fade because spirits move outdoors, or because people settle where canvases are made of basket skin and everyday tools. You answer by carving a deer on a handle that will live in a hand 100 times a day. The sacred starts wearing work clothes more often. You do not mind. Trade routes shuffle like cards. The obsidian bend still shines, but so does a green stone polished to thaw from far south, and shell strings now hum with longer, wetter miles. Your gifts weigh less in fat and more in seed, less in ribs and more in cords that can be unknotted for nets. You add storm-tossed log to your inventory, a shaped tree that becomes a river partner when you learn where to sit and how to ask water politely. Quirky footnote that makes children grin. You practice riding it barefoot first, so the log can't throw your sandals into the joke. Some nights you sit with elders and tally what endures. We still bank the ember. We still mark the door with 3 pebbles. We still give the first ladle to thin hands. You add newer lines that feel older than they are. We winnow on breezy slopes. We keep seed dry in bark jars. We leave a gift at the willow for cousins we haven't met. It's the same ledger warmth warning Miles Mercy. The columns shift. The math remains human. Your stories grow new rooms. You keep the mammoth in your mouth, not as a boast, but as a teacher whose tracks are now made of words. You tell of rivers that move their beds like restless sleepers of trees that fold their shade over the bones of the step of fish that turned your calendar forward. You remind the young that our best invention was never a point or a pot. It was we. Joke 3, you propose a statute requiring at least 1 good laugh per planning meeting. The law passes with unanimous tail thumps. On the first hot night that feels like an apology for everything winter, ever said you take the bone flute to the door and play the scale you learned from cousins in the snow house by the long hearth? Somewhere far north, blue ice still breathes in its slow grammar. Somewhere far south, someone cuts wild grain with a sickle that gleams like the mouth of a new idea. You stand between lamp at your heel, dog at your knee ember, mouse dozing in its fungus nest, and feel the round widen into the next age without tearing the string that holds your camp together. If someone in a far, far future asks how your people survived the ice and then the melt, you'll answer with small verbs and plural nouns. We watched, we shared, we stitched, we traded, we sang. We edited plans faster than the sky edited weather. We kept a little sun in a bowl and a map in our feet. And when the world changed its clothes, we did not forget our manners. Let the room settle now. Let the ember mouse blink to a single steady glow, the kind that makes shadows yawn and lie down. Picture the old ice, a blue wall far off softening at the edges, the way a hard thought melts when you find the right word for it. The river keeps its whisper, a patient ribbon riding through reeds. You're on your back hands, warm breath slow, the fur at your cheek brushed smooth. A light breeze comes through the door hide, just enough to move a strand of hair, just enough to say quietly, I'm here, I'm gentle tonight. The camp around you shuffles into sleep. A cough turned into a sigh, a pot's last tick. A spear leaned just so, a dog resettling his head on your foot like a friendly stone. Far above where the dark is deep and kind, the stars practice their old music. You've learned most of the chorus by now. Watch Share Stitch sing, and the rest can wait till morning. The ledger is balanced enough for dreams. The work you did today all those winters keeps its promise without asking for your attention. Let your thoughts walk the round one last time, smaller with each step. The willow bend, the ridge, the gravel bar with the good echo. Let each landmark dim the way coals do under ash. Not gone, just resting a warm yes beneath a quiet gray. The lamp's flame narrows, and in that gentle narrowing, the body finds its own answer, down and deeper and peaceful. The world can change its clothes again tomorrow. For tonight, the shelter holds. The vent breathes. The door is kind, and you are exactly the right size for this bed. If your mind wants a task, give it something soft. Count the breaths it takes for the ember to wink, or the beats between your dog's slow sighs, or the number of times the river forgets and remembers the same story. Fewer each time, slower each time. The last bright thread of the day tucks itself in. Sleep comes patient and sure like a friend who knows the path in the dark. Good night, traveler. The ice is far away now. The warmth is near, and you are home.